Okay, we're live, so it has begun, and first of all, let me start off by apologising. I don't know if anyone realises, but there are only currently 2 people in the room. It seems that Tristan has, at the last minute, been raptured to heaven, leaving us behind to pick up the pieces. So, yes, I'd like to, of course, introduce our own sepiasiren, who has been part of the book. So whilst we may not have the co-editor as promised, and I am very sorry about that, we can still go on and talk a little bit about the book and what it deals with. So would you like to lead in from that?
Yeah, so Beyond an Absence of Faith, which has gotten a couple of reviews since its inception and everything, it chronicles several different deconversion stories from different points of view. There's a Muslim contributor, there's myself, and from what I gather, I'm going to read some excerpts from reviews. There's a review, and let me actually put a link to this particular review into the little chat section here. Oh, come on. Oh, really?
Do you need a link, or do you... Oh, I can make you moderator.
It's like I'm trying to put the... come on. It won't... See, this is why I cannot stand Google+. But basically, the reviews that are coming in are positive.
You're being added to moderator, so you should be able to do it now.
Okay. Oh, okay. Hold on.
Didn't work.
Hold on.
Do you want to give me the link?
Yeah, let me go to you. Or maybe just put it over in this section here. Google Hangouts always drives me crazy.
Oh.
Here we go. There it is.
Okay.
Free Thought Blogs. And they're talking about the blog is on the Margin of Error is the name of the blog. And he's talking about the book, and he says, Beyond the Absence of Faith is an anthology of 16 accounts of atheists talking about their deconversion to rebel religion. It's been co-edited by Jonathan M.S. Pierce, who writes the blog The Tippling Philosopher, Tristan Vick, who writes Advocates Atheists, and our own Jeremy Behan of Reasonable Doubts wrote a foreword for it. It also happens to be my #1 favorite atheist book that I've ever read. In this review, I want to explain why. So he goes on to tell you why, and he mentions a couple of deconversion stories that stand out to him. And he happens to mention me, which I thought was kind of cool because, you know, I wrote my tale. He says, also, I want to commend the editors for including ex-Muslim voices. These voices are authentic and cover all aspects. I'm very pleased with representation of ex-Muslims in this book. I don't want to get into the specifics because I'd like for you to read the book for yourself, but I'll say that my 2 most favorites were Saliha M. and Alicia Norman. Of these 2, they moved me the most. If I could adapt them to film, I would. P.S. I've been involved with Islam all my life, and I didn't know wearing your trousers above your ankle is a thing. Weird. And he says, here you can buy the book, and he gives the links. But, yeah, there's been a lot of positive feedback so far. Now, again, we're talking about atheist-friendly blogs and stuff. Who knows if this became like a mainstream thing or, something that Christians got a hold of what they would say. Are we trying to do some kind of ploy? Is this some appeal to get people to the atheist religion?
Some hidden motive in the mist.
Exactly. Because, of course, when they use emotional appeals, that's just God moving them. If we do it, it's manipulative. It's manipulative when they do it. We're often accused of not being emotional enough. So I think that this is a good move towards showing that there's a heart in the midst of our ideology. We're not just angry. There's the man! Woo!
You got it. You did.
All right.
Oh, okay. Thank the Lord.
Yeah.
We thought you'd been raptured.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
Am I late?
Uh, 5 minutes. Just
about
5 minutes.
Just about 5 minutes. That's
Oh, okay.
I'm British. I'm meticulous timekeeper. I will stick to the dots, and yeah, that's my fault. So yes.
We were just talking about the book. I read an excerpt of a review from the book from the Free Thought blog, Margin of Error. I read that review. But I think what I wanted to ask you when you came on was what gave you the inspiration, you and your co-writer, the inspiration to do Beyond the Absence of Faith?
Okay, well, actually, it was a project that began about 2 years ago. And I started collecting some deconversion stories of my atheist friends that I had met online, like the A Unicornist and Dead Logic and some other popular bloggers. I'm one of the guys that's in the opposite arena of I would say you have the YouTube group who does YouTube videos, atheist YouTube videos and whatnot, and then you have a very vocal group that just does written blogs, and they don't really do any of the video stuff. So there's the V-blogging and the regular blogging, and I'm one of those guys who just does regular, blogging. We just like to spill our souls out in digital ink. So I started collecting their deconversion stories because one of the things I noticed was how uncannily similar they were to my own deconversion. And there's always these key points that everyone sort of hits during their deconversion, even though each deconversion is different in terms of experience and what led up to it and what influenced it. There's always these, I would say, anchors that you always hit along those lines. So I thought that was interesting. So I started collecting more and more, and I had about 6. And then Jonathan, who I know online because we visit the same forums, and we discuss the same. We both like philosophy, and so we always end up in the same forums talking about the same things. And he had approached me on Facebook and saying he had heard about my collection of deconversion stories of atheists, and he said, you know what, I've been doing the same thing. And I was like, you're kidding. And he showed me that he had about 4 or 5 already published on his own blog, and he blogs at the Skeptic Inc. network, SIN. I love that acronym, SIN. Oh, my daughter is here. She wants to say hello.
Aww, my daughter. Oh, she's hi, precious. She's so precious. What's up, Dumpling? What's your name?
Solara, yes.
Solara? That's
Hello.
a pretty name. How old is she?
Yeah, how old are you?
Good.
No, how old?
4.
Yeah, she's 4. So thank you, hon. I'll see you in a bit. She wants to hang out with her dad this morning, so. But I told her no cartoons because I have to chat. So yes, Jonathan was collecting stories as well, and he had published some to his blog. And I said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we pooled our resources, put them all together into a book? And that's a brilliant idea. So we ended up doing that. And while we were doing that, the thing I noticed was we all had, a collection of stories, but it was basically all white male deconversion stories. And I said, you know what? I want to get at least half of these to be women voices. And so then I started emailing women atheists that I found online, and Alicia is one of them. And thankfully you said yes. Because it really helped, even out the book in terms of the gender bias that we originally had, and then so I think we ended up getting if this is off the top of my head, I think we have 5 women contributors, maybe more. I have to double check on that, but so we got a good a good portion. And then towards the end, Jonathan was like, you know, we need to get some Muslim voices in here as well. And so he went off and found 3 Muslim people who were deconverts from Islam, and or closeted, not necessarily fully deconverted, but still kind of in the process. So yeah, we have some of those, and then I have one friend who spent about 2 decades in India, and he was practicing spiritual yogiism, and his story is in the book, and it's quite interesting as well. So we have, I think, a very diverse group of people ultimately, and so there was no real motivating factor behind putting it together other than I found it interesting, and I thought Ed Babinski had published a similar book through Prometheus Press a few years ago. I don't remember the date exactly, but there hasn't really been one like this since then, and this is already, you know, after the new atheist movement, after the increase of deconversions in the U.S., and I thought, you know, this is a perfect chance to get these voices out there and let people know that it's not just about attacking religion, it's not just about polemics and criticisms and rants. There's also personal stories to tell, and so I thought that was probably the biggest reason to put this book out. Let people know who are going through the same process that they aren't alone, that other people are there with them or have been there, and that there is support in that. So that's the most important reason to get this book out, I think.
Well, you know what I think is kind of cool too is, like, not only does it humanize, because look at, and in essence probably would agree with me here, most deconversion stories are shared among other atheists. It's like, it's very rare that Christians get to hear this side of it. All they get to see from atheists is that we're pissed off or we're challenging their ideas. But they don't know the process we went through to become an atheist. They either think that we were born that way, because I've met Christians who were like, you know, if you just read the Bible, if you knew God's love, I'm like, dude, yeah. I was a Christian for going on 20 years of my life, hon. Yeah. I was out there. And so there's a misconception there. I think the deconversion stories help break the misconceptions about where we come from and what point of view we're coming from as atheists. It shows that, no, we didn't just wake up one day and go, I hate God because, you know, my dog got hit by a car or something. It was a very, very lengthy process. And go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, I mean, do you think that this book will be a sort of form of a sort of self-help book? Because, of course, as you mentioned, previous books have focused mainly on white male individuals who have lost their faith. That by giving a broader sense, you can attempt to help a number of individuals, even if you can't necessarily lessen the pain of their situations that they may be going through with family issues, etc. You can at least equip them in some way to understand what they should expect, what might be coming, etc. Do you think that there's scope for this book to have some part in that, or?
Yes, I actually do. Oh, by the way, I'll answer your question. I just counted how many female authors we did get. There's 7 total. So if you take away my afterword and the foreword, that splits it right down in half. Half male, half female equally. Quite amazing, actually. Okay, so yeah, I think it can be used as a self-help book. I don't think it was necessary. Just a sec, I have to close my window. Sorry about that. I live in Japan, and so we're in the city. It's a bit denser population. We're right next to a busy thorough road, so we just get all this traffic, and there's motorcycles that like to zip by in the morning. So I had to shut the window. So yeah, it can be used as a self-help book if need be. I think what my main goal with it was just to get the voices out there so other people knew that they weren't alone. And if they take something from the stories of people who have been there, done that, then I think it can be extremely helpful. That yes, as Peter said, they could know what to expect. Say, oh, I see, I see what this person went through, and it's almost exactly like what I'm going through. And then they can read ahead and see how that person dealt with it, and they could try that, see if it works for them, and if it does, great. If it doesn't, then they have all these other stories that they can pull from as well. And I think that as a self-help book, if you're going to use it that way, it could be quite beneficial, yes.
I guess the difference is that compared to most books that only talk about one deconversion story, it is like the difference between talking to one person about their experience and having a support group there. You know, it's a support group on paper that you have a wide range of backgrounds that do deal with a number of topics. I mean, I'm amazed that you managed to get apostates of Islam to actually come forward, because I understand that there is, you know, a big concern about that. We've got one in the new Atheist Humanist Secular Society that we're setting up on campus, and you know, she is slightly concerned about that fact. So I think that's absolutely amazing what you are doing there to get that message out. So.
Well, and I have to say too that what you're doing is how it would be helpful to someone like me, because when I first came out, I'm not going to give too much away about what I said in the book, but you know, I detail being from the South. I detail, you know, being a person of color. And I know there's people who, they don't quite get the concept. They go, well, why do we have to separate along color lines when we talk about this stuff? It's like, I could see that being a concern if the world was colorblind, and it's not. You know, on the whole, the world itself is not colorblind. So, yes, we can address the issues that affect, you know, even Native Americans, Asian Americans, you know, Black Americans who deal with deconversion, especially in cultures like even Hispanic cultures where it is so much a part of cultural identity. It's cultural identity. There was a woman who wrote in Huffington Post and said that Black people were going against their culture by being, you know, your Black culture is this. It's Christianity. It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. If anything, we should be running like our asses are on fire from Christianity, because of how it, you know, it was used to condone slavery. It was used to brainwash the Africans that were brought over here. So, no, if anything, it's not a part of our culture. It was a part of a culture that has us in this, what I call, victimized state of mind, that we feel like, you know, we can't do anything without the Lord, you know. And, like, if you even watch even Black films, right, you'll see that there's almost never a Black film that doesn't hint some way to some part of religious aspect in the character. They got a church.
All the characters are part of their church choir, right?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, and that's how ingrained it is. So yes, we are tackling it from a different point of view culturally. That's why it's a little bit different. That's why it needs to be addressed differently. And when I came into the fold, I felt like I was the only Black person in America who was an atheist. I was like, especially in Georgia and in the South, I was like, come on, you know. And so it was great to not only go online, and when the first person I started following was Peaches XX, or was it X? How many X's behind that? But anyway, Peaches, when she first came out, and I was like, look at that girl, sister girl, she's smart, she's really pretty and everything, and she's telling like it is, and it made me happy. And then I started following other different links, like Christina Rad, and then the Amazing Atheist, and these different people, started following them, and from that road, I found the conversion stories. And what I found what was interesting is they mirrored mine. They did. It was like a series of, like Julia Sweeney and my conversion story was a lot alike. It was, I went from a point of, okay, I believe, to I sort of believe, to I'm kind of spiritual, or maybe I'm more of a deist. Well, maybe none of that stuff's true, but I'm still spiritual. There's some kind of cosmic connection in the cosmos kind of thing, and you go from all that to eventually going, I don't believe none of this stuff. There is no God. You know, but it's a process. And then I started looking at other conversion stories and seeing that everybody kind of almost had the same process of, do I believe, do I not believe? Well, I'm spiritual, I'm not spiritual. Well, maybe I'm going to be a Buddhist. Maybe I'll just be a, you know, believe in this. And then eventually they go to a point of, okay, I don't believe. And I found that fascinating. I found it fascinating. So I think that's a good thing. And not only that you did that, but there's several different people's point of views of how they deconverted. You know,
Yes.
something for everybody.
And we have a couple of ex-ministers and pastors, ex-Christian pastors. I think Bruce Gerenser, I hope I said his last name right. It's spelled that way. So I've actually never talked to him in person, just through email. But he was a Baptist minister for near 20 years. He did a little stint as a Calvinist minister and a pastor, and his story is really amazing. If you read his blog, it's kind of depressing because there's so many people that don't take him seriously, like, oh, you weren't a real Christian. But his whole life is all about Christianity, right? So there's no way you can pull a true Scotsman fallacy on that. It's impossible when he has that much history as a Christian and as a preacher. It's just flabbergasting to me that people would just deny that.
I know I slam a lot of these preachers and apologists quite hard, but when it does come down to deconversion, those that deconvert from that state that they've put in so much time and effort, that they could have spent expanding their skills in other areas such as work or arts, etc., when they lose that faith, they've lost far more than a lot of other people have, because they have spent so much of their life, and that is when my empathy just really explodes them. I can't imagine how it is to lose your core, value of life, to lose belief in that. I mean, it would just be absolutely tragic. So
that's actually one of the things this book doesn't touch on so much is like what do we believe beyond the absence of faith. This book was more to show that how you get through that process. But there's another book in the horizon I can see in my mind's eye right now that we would love to put together, and it's the one about what do atheists actually believe. And because atheists are so diverse, there's just a whole array of different worldviews and perspectives that I think would be worth investigating, and that definitely would be a good future book. It's actually an idea that I've been toying with, because when I first published this book, the very first draft of it, the very first manuscript, had 4 extra chapters in the back that were what do atheists believe. And ultimately, it wasn't enough to split the book into 2 parts, and so we ended up leaving it on the editing room floor. So I thought maybe in the future it would be worth going back and visiting that material and talking about what is there worth believing in after you get through the process of moving beyond faith.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to steal the terminology of the Baptist, but it is almost like being born again. It's like Phoenix rising to become hopefully something more bright and colourful and vibrant and expressive in themselves than they ever were before, where they were just restricted and trapped and caged. So it would be a beautiful thing to explore, I think, and it would be interesting to see different ways that people have taken on that post deconversion aspect, and to see how they have developed their ways in coping, in the philosophies that they've gone to. For example, have they become humanist, or have they gone some political route or something like that? So that would be very interesting to read as well.
One of the big influences on my own deconversion was philosophy. I had never really studied that much philosophy, and then I came to Japan about 8 years ago. This would be my second time. My first time in Japan was during a student exchange in college. But yeah, I've spent almost a decade here now, total. So one of the things that interested me was Buddhism. I had never really studied it, and I decided about 3 years ago I would look into it, and so I started reading a lot of the thing that's popular in Japan is the Zen Buddhism. So I started reading a lot of the Zen philosophy, and it's more recent. A lot of classical Buddhist teachings go back thousands of years, 2,000, 3,000 years, and the Zen Buddhism is much more recent, and this goes back just to the turn of the century. So But there's lots of parables that you can just relate to, and I love them so much. And another thing is I started reading, when I came back to Japan, I started reading more science books, and I was still a hardcore Christian when I came back. But even when I married my Japanese wife, I was still Christian. And I remember it was pretty funny. I remember I was very skeptical as a Christian about going to a Japanese Shinto shrine to have part of the wedding ceremony. And so I kept making all these rules that it had to be this way, and my family had to be situated this way, and I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable because they're all Christian, you know, and this is kind of like this is just a different world, a different religion, and I was worried because on my mother's side, we come from the evangelical Christian background, so it's looking at other religions as sort of heretical or even blasphemous as their false religions, viewing them in that type of mindset. And I was really worried about how my family would think about it, and I was really worried about doing it, but it went through fine, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. And then after that, because I was still a Christian at that time, I was like, well, we have to do a Western ceremony as well. We can't just do the I wore a hakama, which is like it's like the male version of the kimono. It's what you see like it's the formal wear for like the samurai. It's just very beautiful layers. Yeah, samurai jack. That's right. And beautiful layers of there's like 7 layers, and my wife had the silken kimono, and there's like 7 layers. They actually have to put pads, like they look like kind of like football pads, because the kimono, pure silk, is actually pretty heavy when you start piling it on. It's light and flimsy when it's just 1 layer, but when you get 7 layers that are folded, I think it ended up weighing about 64 pounds. So that what is that in kilograms? I don't know exactly, but it's really heavy. And they have to put a back brace, a support for her to walk around in, because if you bend a little bit, like if you're walking in these gata style shoes, the wood block shoes, and so they don't have any real grip or traction. So if you like twist your ankle a little bit, you can just topple over. And so you have this whole support group like walking behind the bride, trying to prop her up. It's very elaborate. So after that, I was like, we have to go do the Western ceremony. So we rented out this Italian-styled Western chapel. And in Japan, the wedding services, I'll talk a little bit about Japanese culture because it's interesting. Also, please don't bounce that. You can go in the hallway and bounce, okay? So, I'm sorry. She's making a sour face at me. She doesn't like to be told what to do. Okay. So yeah, where was I? Just talking about the differences in culture and stuff in the wedding services, and yeah. So but after that, I really didn't see what my purpose was in having the Western one, because it was really unnecessary. I just had that Christian mindset that I had to get right with God, that I had to have an actual Christian wedding, and not just this Japanese style one, because that's not a real wedding in my mind at that time. So yeah, so it really does, like you said, Peter, the metaphor of the stifling effects of religion. I would say baptism is a good example of, like, when you become atheist, it's like another baptism. Because religion has held you under the water for so long, and you're basically drowning. And then to finally get out of that, it is to go along with your metaphor. It is like being reborn.
I've seen video of a debaptism going on where someone has a hairdryer and they're getting rid of the holy water on you, and actually they're going around doing people. But talking about weddings and people who've deconverted, I have had someone come and discuss with me what they were going to do at one of their family members' wedding, because of course they were atheists, their family is rather conservative Christian, and they were expected to give a prayer, and they just weren't feeling really comfortable. You know, they wondered that did that somehow invalidate them as an atheist. I was like, well, first of all, you know, we don't share the whole idea that lying is objectively wrong. Lying to hurt someone is wrong, but you know, I always give the example of my great-grandparents who were part of the Dutch resistance and had to lie to the Nazi occupiers. This wasn't as extreme. However, I just asked the simple question of them, you know, would it make their, you know, their family members' day better if they put on this little white lie and gave them the blessing that they wanted on that day, and you know, made that the family members' day as special as they could, just, you know, compensate that one day for the rest of their life? Would that be the best solution? And then when I put it that way, they started to come around to, okay, well, maybe I should, for at least that day, put down this whole rivalry. And you know, it is just words, really. So I am guessing that maybe that's why you didn't have such an issue with your family. Maybe they did think that this is just one day we can put up, and you know, we can all be that family, or two families, I should say, unifying together, and we can just put aside our differences. It's ironic that in what would be considered a religious, you know, ritual to some people, I'd say it's more of a civil war, societal one, that you can put aside that and just come together, you know, enjoy a ritual, whichever ritual it is, great food, some dancing, and some great company. So it's really it's a sign of humanity.
Oh, and I just want to make a point too, because someone's kind of misinterpreting what I'm trying to say about the race issue, and this is what always happens when you try to bring in race. It's sort of like everybody faces things. Like, I've had white friends who had their families disown them because they were atheists. But what I'm trying to say is, culturally speaking, each culture has something different. For example, Hispanics tend to be largely Catholic, so they're going to be dealing with things from that end of the spectrum. Black people tend to be, especially in the South, tend to be largely Baptist, so they're going to be dealing with things from that. Like, I'm demon-possessed, because Baptists believe in demon possession and that kind of thing. It's different types of things that you're going to be dealing with in different cultures. That's not to say that because I deal with something differently that makes it worse. I don't know where people get that idea from, that you can point out that something's different. For example, when men and women have different types of issues, for example, women give birth, right? They are the sex that gives birth. That makes us a little bit different. Does that make us better than men? No. Just because you happen to mention that there's a difference between how people might perceive things, or different things that might go on, doesn't mean that I'm saying I'm more victimized or this is more about me. I don't like that. That angers me, because it's sort of like, it makes me not want to bring up the differences that I'm facing in this particular fight. There are things that are subtly different. You know, yes, as an atheist, me and a white atheist may both face, you know, people trashing our cars and things like that. But as a black atheist, I'm going to deal with the type of, you're not black enough. Sort of like, a good example is when black people, like, because I speak a certain way, or because I read certain types of books, or I get into certain types of things, like I'm not big into hip-hop. So what do I get from other black people? You ain't black. You ain't black. You listen to rock music. What do you think you write? You're a wannabe. You're an Oreo. That's something that you don't get. I mean, when's the last time that a person told a person who was white that they weren't white enough because they spoke eloquently, right? So that's the thing I'm saying. There's subtle differences culturally that people deal with certain things differently in different cultures. Being able to say that that's the case is not devaluing anybody else's struggle at all. I wish people get the fuck up off of that shit. It's pissing me off. I want to be able to say, as a black person, I am dealing with different shit. Here's the different shit I'm dealing with. You're dealing with shit too. I am not devaluing that bullshit either. We are all dealing with shit. Some of it's a little bit differently. You know, unless you're a cross-dressing man, you don't understand what it's like to wear fucking high heels. Does that mean that anything that you deal with as a man is not as important as me dealing with foot pain from fucking wearing high heels? No. Some people deal with different things. It may be on the same level of things, but just fucking different. Get the understanding.
Maybe.
That's all I gotta say.
Yeah.
That's all I gotta say. Anybody can say whatever the fuck they want to, but don't go there. I
There's
don't like when people try to suppress my voice because they don't like the fact that I'm pointing out something particular to myself. Just because something's particular to me as a person does not devalue what you go through. So how come I can't say, hey, I had two women could even have different childbirth experiences. One woman has a child and she has no scars. Another woman has a child and has more scars. But they both went through childbirth. I would say Muslim experiences are a little bit different because they actually may face actual harassment or death threats for deconversion. We don't have to face that. So if I were going to tier this, I would say Muslims are far worse becoming atheists than any of us. But each group has its own particular type of thing to deal with. And that's something that people should be able to say, should be able to point out without people giving them shit.
I'm just I totally agree here. I mean, in sociology, when we study religion, we do actually look at differences in demographics. I'm sorry to just turn this away from a little bit. And one of the reasons we look at for why women and less economically stable areas are often more religious is the aspect of marginality, for example. It's because of the institutional racism that has existed in the past and still exists today. For example, if you send in CVs with different types of names, depending on the name, how it sounds, will differ the types of response that you get. Because of this, it is a little easier for a white individual to go out and get other forms of community. However, marginalized groups are more often unable to get that. Their sense of community has always been, their ethnic group or their religious group, etc., because that's what they were raised into. They were raised into a world where there's this sort of memory of the past and some of the things that still go on that does leave them that sense.
Well, and look at it this way too, and this is what I try to even explain how, like, I was talking about the other day about different cultural experiences. Like when you look at like racism in America, and I'm the kind of person that says I think racism is wrong no matter who the perpetrator is. If a black person is giving a white person crap because they're white, they're just as wrong as a white person giving a black person crap. But you got to look at why some people will look at it a little bit differently is because in America, not only were a lot of people of color brought here as slaves, but there was also Jim Crow segregation up until the late 60s. And so there was an idea that I am lesser than somebody else. So we are combating the idea of being lesser than, right? So there's a double-edged aspect to the racism that we face. Do you see what I'm saying? When a black person is giving a white person crap for being white, it could be based on their preconceptions, but also based on I'm pissed off because I feel like you got more privilege than me, or whatever stupid shit that they might be thinking, which may not be true. A white poor person is just as disadvantaged as a black poor person. But I also think that what people fail to recognize is that there was a history here. There's a history here that they don't want to acknowledge, that they want to sweep under the rug. There is a history here that caused scars. It caused cultural scars. It wasn't until, here's what people don't understand. I was about 8. Jim Crow had ended. My father had to take me and my sister into the back of a movie theater to go see a movie. And this was after Jim Crow was legally abolished. That's something I witnessed. This isn't something I read in a textbook. And this is a guy who actually went and fought in foreign wars and was told to sit in the back of the bus. There's a different type of scar. There's a different type of feel to the racism. It's a little bit different culturally. That's the point that people fail to understand. And these are the things that people try to point out. But then they go, oh, why you got to bring that stuff up? Because it's relevant. It is relevant. You can ignore it, but it is relevant.
In concluding, I think we just say that the fact that, yes, the book has got such a spread of stories is a good thing. I mean, you don't have to be black to take from, the black individual story. You don't have to be Muslim to take from the Muslim individual story. If there's anything that you can salvage, just having a wide range of experiences that can offer you something, that's just the best way to deal with it. It's the sort of scatter shot, keep throwing stuff until something sticks and hope that someone gains something of value from what they read. So.
And I liked what Alicia said about privilege, because that is something that I've been dealing with in my own thinking is the phrase "check your privilege," and I think it's something that people in a position of privilege rarely ever do, because they've been in the position of privilege for so long that they simply lack empathy towards other people who have it worse off than they do. They just haven't been in a worse off situation. And I really never experienced racism as a white male in the U.S., but I've experienced a couple of strange incidences since I've come to Japan, and that's specifically because Japan is pretty much nearly all Japanese. The citizenship is, the race of people are mostly Japanese. That's why it's called Japan, right? And and the foreign population here is only like 10%, and only about 1% of that is no, sorry, I said that wrong. It's only 5%, and only 1% of that is anyone from English-speaking nations. Mostly it's Korean immigrants and Chinese immigrants and Brazilian workers, laborers, and so the white foreign population in Japan is actually quite low. It's a mix in that 1%, and I've had really some funny incidences. I got arrested once for picking up litter in Japan. That was funny. And the other really funny incident, that there's a generation gap here, a huge generation gap. You have the war veterans who you know, they're in the mindset of a conquered people because they fought the war, they lost the war, World War II, the Pacific War. And then you have the generation born after from the baby boomers, after the baby boomers, and they have no resentment towards the West at all. They've grown up where the West and Japan have been under treaty laws, and they're economic partners and business partners for, and a lot of their jobs and a lot of what the baby boomers trained to do was, you know, spread their business, the Japanese businesses and corporations in the Western model. And so they've worked a lot with the West, Western companies and different countries to do that. But there was this one time when I was in the airport, and you still have to go through, when you go through customs, you know, Japanese residents go through this line, and all foreign nationals have to go through this line. But I had to go back and ask my wife and daughter something, and so I go over to the other line. And this elderly Japanese man, who had obviously had a few drinks on the airplane, he saw me come over to the Japanese-only line, and he got so irate, he came over and punched me out of the blue. And I was like, what was that for? And then all these salarymen are, you know, pulling him back off me. I didn't do anything because, you know, I was like, what's going on? I'm totally confused. And those are just some of the times where I've realized that, oh, it's because of a prejudice that he has against me, and the same reason the police you know, singled me out, because I'm this different looking person. You know, they did a little bit of racial profiling. He's a foreigner, we'll pick him up because he's obviously a troublemaker, right? And this racial profiling, I've never experienced it before, and I've just gotten a little taste of it. It's not even that bad, but one of my black friends here said to me, you know, Tristan, we're all minorities here in Japan. And I was like, okay, fair enough. But it really helped me later on, more recently, where I get to talk about these issues with people who do experience it on a daily basis, on a regular basis, a weekly basis, and now I can relate better to them because I have a little bit more empathy for what they have to endure, what they have to go through. And I don't think if I would have ever gone out on my own, gone to a country that doesn't speak English, been among a people who aren't of my race, that I would have never actually experienced those type of tensions. And they're not all bad. I have to say that the majority of my experience in Japan has been excellent. Those were just a few incidences that have occurred, and nothing serious. But it just helped me check my own, privilege, and I think that it helped me grow because of it.
Well, who was it in the group that said, it's check your privilege or check your biases, right? And I kind of like both of them because, I lean towards the idea of saying we have our own biases. I know that I have my biases. I think we all have them based on our experiences, right? But I think that at the end of the day, like I said, there's certain things, like I would never understand what it was like to be a Native American who was near genocided off this planet, right? But I do understand the mentality that's left over from what I call the slavery victimization mentality, growing up in the hood and having people tell me things like when I tried to excel in writing or literature, and they're saying, why you want to be white? Why you acting so white? Why you talking so white? Why you gotta act like a white person? Why? And I'm thinking to myself, why is aspiration, success, or anything identified as being white? And you can trace it back to the whole idea of the house Negro and the person who worked the cotton fields. The house Negroes were light skinned. They got to read. They learned how to read. They were proper. They tended to take their privilege and throw it in the face of the darker skinned slave owners. So that's looked down upon in our culture, to see people acceding, because it's looked at as you're being a house Negro. That's something I don't think a white person can identify with in America, right? It's a different thing. So there's certain things that are very, just like, I don't know what it's like to be Dutch, French, there's just, there's certain things that are very, very cultural. And I think that's when people try to say, well, we're all the same. Sure, we're all the same on a human level, and genetically speaking, we're all the same race. But when it comes to ethnic diversity or when it comes to cultural differences, there are differences. What's wrong with pointing that out? I think the people who don't want that pointed out are uncomfortable with it because maybe they're feeling some kind of guilt or some weird thing, and they feel like you're trying to throw something in their face. I'm not throwing anything in anybody's face by saying I experienced something a little bit different than you. There's not that implication. Why should you believe that's the implication, right? It's like, as an atheist, I can identify with you as a fellow atheist. That's where we have a common ground. Just like if you were an artist and I'm an artist, it wouldn't matter what your background was, we have that commonality. We all have commonalities, but we all have basic differences. There's nothing wrong with stating there's differences. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that there's differences. And the people who it's just crazy. I don't understand why people have this particular need to not look at the fact that we're different. Even among races, like, you got blondes, you got brunettes, you got redheads, right? So, You see what I'm saying? There's nothing wrong with differences. Look, here's, and then I'll give you the floor, but if we decided tomorrow that somehow being blonde was not desirable, right? And then we were going on this campaign and everybody's the same. And then a blonde walks into the room. Everybody was trying to dance around the fact the person was blonde. She's got blue eyes. She's really nice. I really think she's a cool person. You could say she's blonde. She is a blonde, right? That's a difference. There's nothing wrong with her being blonde. I think that we get conditioned to think that differences are bad somehow, so we are afraid to point them out, when there's nothing wrong with pointing out that there's differences.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was going to go into a little bit, was that the idea of that people are different and then creating labels for them because they are different. That's what I find is wrong. You may have read on my Facebook last week, I went on this little rant about a Japanese term that they use for the children of biracial couples. They call them half.
Yes.
And it never bothered me until this year. For a long time, I just thought it was a harmless term. And then it started being used on my daughter in a situation where she was at the park playing, and they wouldn't accept her as full Japanese. They kept grilling her on why does she know English. These are like elementary school kid-aged children that she wants to play with, and she's just in preschool still. And they're grilling her on why does she know how to speak English? Why does she look different? And they kept calling her half, and it was pretty harmless because they didn't realize what they were doing. But what it ended up doing to my daughter was in Japan, differences aren't really celebrated like in American culture. That's a very cultural thing. In Japan, the homogeneity is what is important. People want to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
They want to think the same, act the same. And it's kind of important in Japan too because of the way the culture is set up, how dense the population is. Getting along is really what is important. So one of the best ways to do that is to be as much the same as you can be. And so what happened was my daughter was being grilled on that, and they asked her, well, where were you born? Because you know English, you look different, you're half, right? And she felt cornered, and she didn't want to say she was born in Japan because they don't see her as Japanese, and so she lied and told them that she was born in the U.S. And after that, I asked her, why did you lie to them? Why did you say you weren't born in Japan? And she said, well, I felt bad. And so after that, it really affected me, and I started thinking about the term, and then I realized, well, the way it was being used, whether they didn't mean it or intentionally used it, but the way the term is designed is actually to single out those people who look different, and it's only based on looks that they're using that term, and not because of genetic differences or anything, but just the looks. So I wanted to make a little rant about how that term is racist and why we shouldn't be using it. And I think I got a lot of support on that. There's even a documentary called Hafu, and it's a Japanese documentary on children of biracial couples, or even of a full race that was born a full ethnic race. The parents came over to Japan for whatever reason, and they were born in Japan. So they have a Japanese nationality, but because they're a different color, they get mistreated. And the film is actually about the bullying of half or other racial children. And so that's an interesting documentary. I hope people will check it out.
I guess it goes back to the pre-war ethno-religious ideology that the Japanese had. I mean, they were very strict about all other Asian cultures were inferior, and then the rest of the world was even below that sort of thing. You know, they had this very strict ideology, and it's, you know, a lot of people think that religion exists in the same way around the world. There's religion and there's, you know, the state, and they always exist in the same way. No, because of course you've got the ethno-religious groups, which like was the pre-war Japanese. Then you've got the ideological religious, where like Islam, the religion is the state. There is no actual state in a sense of a separate entity that exists without it. And then of course you go over to, say, America, and you have both the state and religion has a few tentacles over the state sort of thing, but beyond that it all exists in very different sort of cocktails and mixtures. And of course then when you go to ethnic minorities, even within a country, say for example America, yeah, they've got their religion, but they haven't got their state as such, because if you look at police brutality rates, arrest rates, stop and search rates, the state seems against them, so all they do literally have is their religion. That is the only thing they have. So yes, I don't know where we want to take the conversation from here, if you want to stay on this topic, or maybe we'd like to think about opening to some possible callers in, or I'll leave that up to you.
I think that I like that we branched into this, because I think the thing about atheism, and the reason why it never had a lot of diversity and it's now having diversity, is that there was a perception that this is a white boy club. There was that for a long time. Some people call it sausage fest. I hadn't even heard the term sausage fest until I became an atheist. And I heard other women saying, oh, atheism is a sausage fest. I'm like, what the hell is a sausage fest? But I learned, okay, well, I kind of get that. So, yes, there was a perception for a long time. And so what people fail to understand when they want to bury the ideas of diversity or different outlooks, cultural outlooks under the rug, is they are burying that very concepts that might, if you address them, might bring other people from other cultures into the ideology, because they don't think it's for them. Well, it's not. That's a white boy thing. You know, it was one thing my dad used to say all the time, because I was in the rock and roll music. And he didn't mind rock, but every once in a while he'd shake his head and go, why you like that white boy music? right? And so there's a thing that people have where they think this is white and this is black, or this may be Asian and this may be Western or whatever, right? And people separate by those ideas, which is ridiculous. I like rock music because I like rock music, frick, right? I don't put, cultural identities on things that I like. When I married my Irish husband, I didn't go, here's an Irish man, let me marry that man. I married him because I adored him. He was a sweet guy, and that never came into play for me, right? I just think that people put too much emphasis. I think we should look at differences, but not put an emphasis on them. It's like I said to one of the girls in the story there, that there's an elephant in the room that should be addressed, but the elephant itself is irrelevant. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's where I think people get confused. They go, well, we don't want to mention the elephant in the room, and so we will make that the most relevant aspect. It's not. You can say, you are a black girl, and it be meaningless. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm black, but that's meaningless. He's Irish, and that's meaningless. Do you see what I'm saying?
I feel part of the problem here because, of course, I'm a social science student, so it's one of our jobs to sort of, for easier sake, we kind of divide people up so we can research different demographics, and then, of course, we publish our results, and we don't think about the sort of impact this then has, because then people take those and they think, the scientists are using it, therefore it's justified. No, it's just a way for us to really differentiate between groups and discuss what's going on in this part of society and that part of society. So it's quite difficult as well. Should social science individuals be taking more responsibility in this and how they label things? And
well, Peter, here's the thing I had to point out to another person too, because people often say, well, why does it matter? Why is it important? But I had to, because why do we have to have labels? I said, well, here's one reason, the extremely important reason why we have to have labels. If you look at the Innocence Project, which shows you the people who were exonerated based on DNA evidence and stuff like that, 70% of the people exonerated by DNA evidence were black people. Of all the people incarcerated, 70% of the number exonerated were black, meaning a huge portion of the black population was being railroaded into jail. If we did not have the ability to differentiate between cultures, we wouldn't have that statistic. We wouldn't know that that's an issue that needed to be looked at, addressed, and combated. So there has to be some identifiers so we can see what's going on in different cultures and different groups. If one group is being screwed with more than another group, if somebody is being more disenfranchised than another group, we have to have identifiers. But at the same time, do those identifiers have to matter in interpersonal relationships? For a census, maybe. For social studies, sure. For even the ability to see how other groups are faring in relation to the whole, sure. But if I meet you and you're a good person and you happen to be Irish, I don't care. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think that people have a tendency to want to take the baby and throw it out with the bathwater to achieve a goal, when they don't really look at the whole. These things are complex. They're not in either or proposition. Either we're not going to talk about race or we are. Either we're not going to say she's black or we are going to say she's black. It's complex. You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying.
Yeah. And so that's why it gripes me when people try to say things like that. It's like, I had a friend of mine who said when we were in a DVD store and there was some DVDs on the rack based on it was called, not blaxploitation, but there was one that was talking about roots in different black movies like Queen, and he said, why do you guys have to keep bringing this stuff up? But at the same time, this guy was a big Nazi Germany buff, and he was all big into Hitler's reign and that time period and stuff, and he was really into that aspect. So what I said to him was like, slavery is an aspect of history just like Hitler's reign and regime. Why do you think it's okay and cool for you to study that? And I would never say it wasn't. I would say that's an aspect of history. But if an aspect of history is explored from the side of the people who were victimized by certain aspects of history, then that's wrong? No, you don't want to bury, aspects of history just because it's uncomfortable. Just like I don't think we should bury what happened to the Jewish people in the Holocaust because it's uncomfortable. We need to be made uncomfortable because we don't ever need to go to a place like that ever again, right? If it's making us uncomfortable, it means that we have enough consciousness and common sense to understand it was wrong, and we don't ever need to go back there again. You bury it under the rug, as one philosopher said, you're doomed to repeat the same mistakes, you know? But, yeah, I mean, I think as far as it goes, though, to go back to the thing about the atheism, I think the thing that kind of irks me about it is that there's even things that women may face that are a little bit differently than men. For example, Jacqueline Glenn, as a female atheist, gets a lot of, hey, baby, can I have your drawers? Oh, man, I got a big one to stuff up there up her ass. And these are the type of things that women go through. Now, men go through things, too. And, again, this is not to say that men don't have their fair share of stuff. But women may go through a lot more sexualization, being sexualized. You know, if I went to Amazing Atheist commentary, the type of insults he get would be, you're a fat motherfucker, you know, you're loud, you're obnoxious, you eat Doritos, you hate women. These are the things he would get. Jacqueline Glenn gets shut up, bitch, or, you know, I bend you over and fuck you on a desk, and these types of things. They're different type of harassment built on different types of things. So, not this. You see what I'm saying? Huh?
Yeah, Jacqueline Glenn gets a lot of harassment.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, and that's par for the course. I mean, I had somebody call me a atheist witch, right? And so there's different types of harassment. Now, does that mean that that makes it better or worse for me as a female atheist? I could give a flying fuck. I laugh at those guys. I think they're idiots, right? So, but at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that there's subtle differences in how we're approached and how we do you see what I'm saying? And it doesn't mean that you're a victim per se, because some people take it and run with a platform of victimization. I'm a female atheist. I'm going through this. It makes me more of a victim. No, I think that with TJ being called a fat fuck is just as bad as somebody saying I'm going to bend you over a desk and do you. I'm just saying that there are differences. And if there's a knee-jerk reaction that people have when you try to point out differences. I don't understand where that comes from. Just because something is, like I said, just because a person's victimized differently does not take away from your particular brand of victimization. Why are you trying to suppress my perspective on my particular type of victimization? Why? That's what I don't get. You know what I'm saying? I don't understand that. Is it like because if I point out that it's different, somehow you take it as me thinking that lessens your particular type of victimization? I wish I would understand where that comes from. You know, especially in the atheist community. And maybe it is because it was so called a Sasha's Fest for so long that maybe as these new groups get incorporated in, there's a difficulty in trying to see things from the other perspective as an atheist group. I don't know.
I actually think the atheist atheist privilege is related to the white privilege. The reason why it is a white male sausage fest, as it is said, is because only the white males are the ones privileged enough to get away with being openly atheist for a long period of history. It wasn't until more recently when minorities and women and other people were given a platform to voice their own beliefs and be taken seriously. And I think a lot of the knee-jerk reaction to people like Jacqueline Glenn are people who just don't like a woman's opinion to be out there, or for that matter, a beautiful woman's opinion, or for that matter, a beautiful, intelligent woman's opinion, because it is a challenge to that privilege, and I think we need more of that, more challenges to that. We need to celebrate the diversity, not go back to this monochrome. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's a good thing. I just think that when something is a status quo for a while, it makes it very difficult for the status quo to understand that not only is there a new group, but they're going to bring with them their own particular perspectives, their own particular types of issues and problems. Like, for example, to me, when I hear people who grouse about, oh, you know, we're supposed to be equal and they're bringing this up, it's like a person saying, hey, how come a man saying, how come I don't have abortion rights? Because you don't get pregnant, you know? There are differences. It's okay to bring that shit up. And I have different perspectives based on those differences. It's okay to bring that up. And I think that as you get more diverse, you're going to see different groups bringing their own perspectives and the things that are different with those perspectives. And it does not take away from what you may personally. It's just like, for example, I think Essence told me one time about how when he tries to tell people things from his perspective, they go, oh, you're a privileged white boy. What do you know about struggle? When he himself has had struggles as a white male. He has had his particular brand of struggles. And so I would never demean his struggles just because I, as a woman, I have a particular type. And I think that's where people get the misperception that if I say I have a particular type of struggle, somehow it demeans somebody like Peter's struggle. I'm just saying it's different.
There's also, you know, the difference between what's on your skin and also what's inside. For example, being a biromantic, psychologically androgynous male, that does shift things a little bit. You know, I've had to sort of come out twice, first as atheist and then later as being biromantic. So yes, there's also a lot of preconceived notions that because you are white, you don't have these issues. Well, you know, who you are because who you are on the inside, you know.
Yeah, and I've actually not heard that term, biromantic.
Yes, it's because my sexuality is a bit more confusing. Biromantic refers to that. Yeah, I'm quite happy to be in love with either gender. So.
Okay.
And you know what? It's kind of. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tristan.
Oh, I've heard of the term polyamory, but. I'm just making
polyamorous means that you have multiple romantic partners at the same time.
Multiple romantic partners, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and here's the thing too, and going back into the atheist thing, is that I notice that atheists are more open about exploring sexual topics, sexual ideas. You know, when I was a Christian, I was always as sexual explorative as I am today. The only difference being that that was frowned upon. So I suppressed my curiosity and I didn't explore it. Now, as an atheist, I find that I can explore it. Now, that doesn't mean that there are all these sexually liberated atheists, because I was just on Peach's video the other day and somebody said something like, how come atheist women like slutting up their videos with their low-cut tops? You know? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, whatever. But at the same time, there's less of that than if I went to a Christian forum and a girl was wearing a low-cut top. Do you see what I'm saying? There's more ability to explore those concepts in the atheist religion, and I think that's actually pretty cool.
Yes. Okay. So Peter, were you gonna take some caller questions or read off some questions?
I have some questions. Nobody's asked any questions. You know.
There's a delay, and they may not have even got to the point where he asked.
You have a transfixed audience. You know, you're like the hypnotoad. No one's going to ask any questions. You're an authority here, so.
Yeah. But no, I think
so,
I was going to set off by.
If anybody wants.
Huh? What?
Oh, I'm just saying, feel free, anyone out there, to ask questions. We're open to questions.
Yeah, and here's the thing, too, that I think I went off a little bit. I don't know if you read one questions thing, but I've encountered this a lot when race comes up. Why do you got to bring that up? Because it is the elephant in the room. It is. As much as people try to act like race isn't an issue, it generally ends up being. Okay, hold on. I think we got a question. I've signed up for teaching another day. I'm happy to end that. I like what Baybek said. Baybek, yes. Yes, we don't label stupid shit as sin. That's right. And I agree, man. That's the biggest thing. It's like, you know, you'll have some people who bring their conservative views from the Christian era to their atheism. But as a whole, I think once atheists get to a point of leaving the dogma behind, they're more apt to want to explore different concepts they may not have explored because they were suppressed to explore it. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's, again, going back to your book, beyond an absence of faith, what it does is it says there's so many different points of view, different places where people come from when they come to atheism. I think that's wonderful. That's why I loved your book. That's why when you told me about the book, I wanted to give my story to it. Because at first I was like, what's he talking about? And then you told me more about it. I said, okay, I will be a part of this. Because, again, I don't like the fact that people try to make it seem like we all go through the exact same things all the time. That is not true. We all go through different processes. We may come to the same conclusions, but we may go through different processes to get there. And that's the thing that people should know. Right? I agree. Don't you think?
Yeah, and the atheism isn't the most important thing about the book. It's the fact that it's part of the journey. You began as something, you went through this process, you ended up becoming something else, but it doesn't define you the same way your origin did. So you're free to go anywhere after that. That's why I titled the book Beyond an Absence of Faith, because once you lose the faith, it's wide open to whatever you can become. The sky is the limit, as they say, and I really wanted that to be like the image in people's minds and that's why I used a picture of the universe on the cover. I also designed the cover, so I just wanted it to be about high five. I'm getting better at it. I use InDesign. Adobe InDesign, and this year I've taken online tutorials and stuff, and I'm just finally getting comfortable using that program. But anyway, I just wanted that image of the wide open expanse of the sky, of space, of the cosmos, and the sky is the limit, right?
Oh, and I was going to say there's a couple of questions here. Scarlett, well, she said more of a comment. She said, Peter, interesting to hear about your sexuality. Not a question, but just a comment. You're not the only one with such sexuality, and I have to raise my hand on that because we've talked, and he knows I'm bisexual, well, I wouldn't say biromantic. I'm not biromantic because I am bisexual in the fact that I would have sex with another woman, but I don't think I could have a romantic relationship with another woman, whereas I would have a romantic relationship with a man. I am attracted sexually to women. I've tried having a relationship with women, and it just doesn't fit for me. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm not biromantic, but I am bisexual.
Yeah, first of all, after going to a conference a couple of weeks back, I went to the NUS LGBT conference, which is the National Union of Students conference that's held here. It's for our student unions around the country, etc. It's all the LGBT societies come together and they make motions, etc. After seeing the diversity there, you begin to understand that there's not going to be a point where you reach, eureka, I know what my sexuality is, what my gender is, because there could always be something later on that's going to change your mind, it's going to change your definitions or how you understand them, etc. I wasn't using biromantic prior to the conference, but I started talking to them. I started talking to them about what demisexual is or asexual is, and that's where the confusion starts coming in on my sexuality. But then psychologically androgynous, then you got physiologically androgynous, and don't get the two confused. Then you got non-binary, genderqueer. There's so many different groups that you find out about, and you just realize that it's all this wibbly wobbly, sexy, wexy, gendery stuff. So
yeah, sex is not a binary either or choice. I think it's a lot more complicated than we thought. And Tristan, I was even thinking as he was saying this, maybe your next book could be an exploration of atheism and the types of different sexualities because we're probably more prone to actually explore that without being afraid of exploring it. So maybe that could be maybe we'll co-author the book because I'm interested in human sexuality in that way, and I love that. I learned about asexuality through him and another gentleman whose name is Red Cloud, and he's a friend of mine, and he's out about it, so I can actually say this. He's asexual, schizophrenic, but he is asexual, and he said that. I said, what the heck is that? So he told me, and I started studying it, and there's so many different types of gender and sexuality that we are just very much unaware of, and that's fascinating. And as atheists, that's something that we may explore and be more honest about than, let's say, the theist side of things.
I have the perfect title, The Atheist Big Bang.
Yeah.
The atheistic Big Bang. We're banging. Oh, wait a minute. Here's another question. what do you want your family to do with your bodies when you die? Now, it's funny because when I saw this, I had to bring this back up. I did it in another video, but this little green thing here says donate life. And this is given to me at my cousin's funeral. She died. She was a Christian, but she was an activist. She was a volunteer. And one of her passions was, making sure she was big on educating people on organ donation. Right, and so when she died, the hospital she worked with gave everybody this big pile of little green things here. And so I am an organ donor, and I believe that when I die, I want people to take my organs. I want to be cremated. I wanted my ashes put somewhere in a forest and maybe build a little seat there that says, "This seat is courtesy of this woman who you have no idea who she is." And you sit there and enjoy a beautiful view. I don't want to be buried and rotten in a box. I want to give back to the land, like my Indian half of my body's ancestors, I want to give back to the land, and I want to give hope to somebody who may need an organ. Just, what would you guys do?
Tristan, do you want to take the center stage? I mean, we did spend so much time panicking that you want to go.
Actually, I've thought about it recently because my father killed himself last year, and so he wanted in his will he asked to be cremated, and I was thinking, well, what would I want to be? And so if I died, and I think it actually depends on where I die. Cremation makes the most sense, especially if it's in Japan, because first of all, I can't afford a grave spot in Japan. It's like $20,000 American to reserve one, just to reserve it. And then it costs far more to actually purchase the plot of land, and that's just because land in Japan is very limited, and so they don't do burials that much. It's just far too expensive, and so cremation is the main thing they do here. So yeah, I think if I ended up living here long enough where I died here or had an accident here, cremation would make more sense. And if I was back in the States, I don't know. I would have to give it more thought, but I'm leaning towards cremation there too. So yeah, and my father didn't give any specifics to what to do with his remains, so I decided to bring some back to Japan because he had come to Japan 4 times, and one of his most favorite things in the whole world were ancient castles. And Japan has these beautiful Japanese-style castles, and so whenever he came here, he would just, wake up early in the morning before sunrise, and he would just disappear, and he would come back about 10 a.m., and I'd be like, "Dad, where'd you go?" And he said, "Well, I took my camera and I went to the castle," and he just spent all morning taking pictures of the castle as the sun came up, and he just loved it so much, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if I just spread some of the ashes around the castle, and so just this being symbolic of his love of that, and that he could, have part of him put there, and I thought that would be a nice gesture. So I brought some ashes back to Japan and did that. So yeah, that's it seems like that's the way to go in my mind. I'd also, but if you could say how would you like, I would like some of my DNA to be preserved, like this, hypothetically speaking. Just take a DNA sample before the cells die, and freeze it, and then in the future just clone me, bring me back. Why not?
Of course, I agree with donating the organs and all that, etc. I don't know how much they can actually take and how much they'd find useful. I don't know how I feel about cremation, because of course you're putting a lot of energy into destroying matter. Then again, I don't want burial either. I mean, call me quite cold in that sense. I'd be quite happy to be put through whatever remains after all the useful stuff's been taken out, put through a sort of grinder and then recycled in some way to be something helpful. I know it's quite cold and clinical, but I just don't see the point in me, when I'm dead, taking up a lot of energy to turn me into ash or burying me in a box somewhere. Yeah.
I'm also an organ donor, by the way. I didn't mention that, but I'm an organ donor in the U.S., and I also signed up to be one in Japan, but I don't know legally how that would work. Like, I signed up for it, but if I die, I don't know if there's an international law or anything that says you can't harvest American organs on, you know, I don't know if I have to go back to the States, or I don't know how that works, but anyway.
If you sign up to both, do they like argue over who gets which party?
So silly. You guys, there's another question, and I'm going to run out of the room to go take a potty break as you chew over this, but the question's from Spartan74F, and his question, how do I get control of my want for revenge against the people who killed my friends because of their religious beliefs, the killer's beliefs? And y'all chew on that while I run to the little girl's room.
That's so... Wow, trying to find that question so I can see it exactly.
Yeah. I want for revenge. Well, the desire for revenge is stems from the anger and the resentment you feel towards the other group or the people who harmed you. And the problem with revenge is that it perpetuates the exact same situation when you retaliate against the other group. Then they are inflicted with the pain that you caused them, and then the eye for an eye thing becomes prominent, and then what it becomes is they want revenge, and then it creates an endless cycle of them retaliating, getting their revenge, but then re-inflicting harm on you, and it keeps going.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question I would pose to myself if I was in such a situation is, do I want to perpetuate that type of violence where it continues the eye for an eye thing just so I could feel satisfied? Or should I try and find a way to change that paradigm to try and break the cycle? And I think there's probably possible ways to do that. One would be, and I'm not suggesting you have to do this or anything, but I'm saying it's what I would choose to do if I was in that situation. And I would seek counseling, because sometimes it's a good idea just to talk about it, talk through the issues. There's also learning to use the religious terminology, forgive the other people, or not necessarily forgive them, but realize that they may in fact have done that because of their own brainwashing, that they too are victims of a sort, that they may not have had a choice in the matter in how they were raised, or what ideologies that were forced upon them, and so that they may also be victims that were put in a situation where they were brainwashed so extensively that they thought they had to kill for this religious reason or this reason. And I think when you can sympathize with them in that way, you don't necessarily have to forgive them the crime, but at least you can understand what had shaped them into the cruelty they had become, and then instead of becoming that cruelty as well, move beyond it. Oh, hi. Do you want to show your movie? My daughter is back. She wants to show her favorite DVD.
Hey, Pumpkin, what's that?
It's called Purikira.
Or started.
Yes.
Free.
It's in English we call it Purikira, and it's a cute anime. She likes her anime.
Oh, me too. Me too. She got good taste in genres.
As for the question myself, I mean, I have to agree with a lot of you stated about how effectively these people have also been victim of a system that has, destroyed the value in people. They are vile, sinful creatures, and these vile and sinful creatures specifically haven't even found our way, sort of thing. So, that's the type of mentality that they were taught. It's not because you're in Japan, but it's actually, I do often go to talk about the Second World War. The Japanese mentality that they were taught throughout the war got them to commit some of the most heinous atrocities, from performing dissections on fully conscious individuals without anesthetic, because they could not afford to waste anesthetic on those that they viewed as animals or lessers. You know, they were taught that the system, that yes, they were animals, that they were lesser, and by the end of it, there were even events of Wendigo psychosis occurring, and that's the actual willing consumption of human flesh. There was one incident where an American charge ended in a retreat of the Americans. They then bombarded the mountainside for a couple more days before then charging again. And when they got there, they found that 2 of the men they'd lost in the initial charge had been stripped down to the bone and devoured. And the really scary part was when they got to the back of the cave, there were 200 tins of rice, meat, vegetables in the back of the cave. They were not running out of food. They chose to do it because it was a fresh source of substance. You know, this is how malicious indoctrination can be.
Yes.
And, you know, that was less than a generation. That was just several years. I mean, when the Japanese landed on the shores, they would tether Chinese farmers to telephone poles, and then they would be told they were going to have bayonet practice, and they would bayonet charge not sandbags but these Chinese villagers attached to poles. That was the sort of rigorous indoctrination that can go on. Of course, people in religion go through much the same as,
Yes.
you know, your God is greatest, you are then his servants, and then there's everyone else, and that can lead to a great deal of fundamentalist worldview. That's what gets people to fly, you know, planes into buildings or bomb abortion clinics. That's the sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and to expound on that, Spartan, it's just like take an innocent child, and put it into a situation where it's told, if you want to win God's favor, this God who loves you and stuff, you will do this, this, and this, and take that child and have it in a culture that reinforces that idea over and over and over again. Then you can see how, because at least in some place like America, we have different cultural ideas, and then people go out there and they can see different concepts, and they can go, okay, well, I don't believe that anymore. But if you are part of a family that teaches you that, and then you go out in a culture that teaches you that, and anyone who tries to teach or tell you anything differently, they're killed, and all this stuff, it's very difficult to get your mind not wrapped around that kind of thing. It's easy for us being in a different situation to go, I wouldn't believe that. Would you? Would you not? I don't know. And so so I look at it, as they've all said, you know, as, you know, you can blame the indoctrination. And I know you can say, well, that's sort of a little comfort, but then just look at it and understand that they were kind of put in a position of, you know, either you believe this or die. Look at the people of Islamic faith or Muslim faith who leave and they're getting death threats. What's the young lady, Ali, you know what I'm talking about, the one that Hitchens talked to? What's her name?
In the book, you mean?
No, the young lady Hitchens highlighted.
Oh, I am Percy Ali.
Percy, yeah. She is, I mean, it's so bad for her that when she would move into neighborhoods, people would start petitions to get her out of the neighborhood because they were like, no, that's dangerous. You know, she could be here and they throw a rocket in here and blow us all up. That's how bad it was for her, simply for saying, I don't believe. So if you can imagine that kind of pressure and that kind of a culture, do you see what I'm saying? So not to excuse it, but to give you more of a sense of why you can be a little bit more forgiving.
Fundamentally, there's nothing that will bring back your friend, and it pains me to state that there's nothing you can really do in that sense. That the best that you can do is take that tragic experience and make it your personal, you know, vendetta or objective to ensure that this does not happen to someone else, to ensure that others are not religiously indoctrinated into the same fundamentalist worldview, to ultimately challenge the echo chamber that many churches have going that prevent this sort of exterior criticism. So,
well said, well said. And there's another question. I don't know if we did answer this one. There's another one from Spartan. He asked what is a asexual? Further down. Second question, what's an asexual?
Asexual is just someone who lacks a sexual drive. So, you know, they won't go out and specifically search for someone to have sex with. You know, doesn't mean that they don't enjoy sex. It's just there's not a biological push for it as such. You know, have you ever had those days where you're so engrossed in something that you forget to eat? It's not that you couldn't eat, it's that you don't want to eat, you don't have that drive. Well, imagine that of sexual impulse, however, continually. And then I also mentioned demisexual. Demisexual is similar. It states that, you know, you don't have a sexual drive until you start developing more of a relationship with that person. Both demisexuals and asexuals do have sex and can have sex. It's just they both lack that initial drive.
It is funny because Essence and I have had these discussions, and I'm trying to understand asexual nature too, because I am an extremely sexual person, and not in the sense of being promiscuous. I don't like promiscuity. I can never be polyamorous. But I enjoy sex within the confines of intimate relationships. And so I could not even understand not having the drive, I guess. So it's very difficult for me to comprehend. So we were talking about this, and I said, I don't think I could have a relationship then with an asexual person, because I think, oh, I want them to enjoy it. I don't want them to just do it because I want to do it and all this stuff. But Essence is trying to make me understand that it doesn't quite work that way, that they can enjoy sex, it's just not a drive. But I look at it like I don't want to be sort of like he's like playing Nintendo, and I go, baby, you know, I got my little negligee on. I'm like, you know, you ready? And he's like, you know, can I finish this first? Because he's just not that interested. You know what I'm saying? I just don't want it to be like that. I want it to be where when I want to hop on it, he's ready to hop on it too. So, but I think what's kind of good about the differentiations and us exploring these types of different sexualities is that maybe it can create more sexual compatibility with couples and less stress. Because can you imagine, before we were aware of these things, an asexual person marrying a person with a really hypersex drive, and that clash because there's no understanding of each other's different tastes, or not even tastes, but different inclinations, right? So it's good that we explore this. So a person who's asexual can probably find a person who's a demisexual, or someone who doesn't put the same kind of emphasis on it like somebody like me would, right? So I think that's wonderful. I think it's great. That's why I think it should be explored and talked about, you know, like me and Tristan's book.
I see you're already planning it.
Yeah, Big Bang, Atheist Big Bang. That's good. No, but what do you think? I mean, what is that? I know this is probably the first time you're hearing some of these terms. What do you think about when you hear something like asexual or biromantic? Or
Are you talking to me?
yeah.
Well, no, I've heard these terms. The biromantic was the only term I haven't heard, and it's new to me. I do enough reading that it was almost bizarre that I hadn't heard it.
I hadn't heard it until I went to this conference, and I'm LGBT. I mean, I was running my college's LGBT group, and then I was the men's officer at the university LGBT group, and I didn't know this term either. But yeah, I think it's just nice that it does. There are so many describing factors, and you can just choose to have as many or as few as you like. I mean, some people just state that they're queer. That's all they will state. They will say that you're queer, and then if you gain enough trust, if they gain, you gain enough of their trust, etc., and they decide to tell you, okay, well, I'm not really attracted to this, that, etc., they'll do that. But some people are so complicated, they just prefer saying, I'm queer. I don't have an issue saying, I'm a biromantic, psychologically androgynous individual. I find it to be sometimes quite fun, because sometimes you get people asking, well, what's that then? And I find that I have quite a good way in explaining some of these things and hopefully educating them a little bit, and then they can pass that on. It can be like a game of Chinese whispers. Yeah. And then gradually the information degrades as it goes along.
Well, there's that. Speaking of sexuality, I'm going to shift it a little bit. Similar topic, but there's that study that's been going around on masturbation, but showing the difference between how often men masturbate, between how often women masturbate. But I always find such studies hard to really judge, because do people lie when they're surveyed? Like if for example, if you were to interview a highly religious person, even if they do it, they know in their mind that they're constantly told that it's a sin. So they would probably say no on the survey. And then you have the people who, like Alicia says, the atheists, or the people who don't have that religious programming, that are more open to explore, and they probably just, go all out, So.
You look at the various different cases of preachers who have then been caught having an affair with some prostitute, even a male prostitute in some cases. It's like, you were the one that preached against this at the very most, and it does become a sign that, we start saying he preaches against it so much that it's most likely he has something to hide, sort of thing. It's overcompensating.
Essence, even Hitchens basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, that whenever he sees a preacher going off and off about some kind of sexual perversion, he would set his watch to the how long it would take before that particular individual was caught doing the very thing he was preaching against. And I was like, that's pretty much true, because at the end of the day, it's sort of like, I know a friend of mine who, and I grew up in a gay male household, but I knew a lot of gay females. The gay male and gay female culture are a little bit different, but I ran into both, and my gaydar is like this huge, right? And so I knew a girl who I thought was gay, and all she did was trash lesbians all the time. And I'm thinking to myself, sister, you just need to come on out and see what's going on with you, get you a nice girlfriend, because you need to chill out. But and another guy who I thought was a gay, and I actually think he was undercover gay, like exploring it. Some of his boyfriends who were roommates, I kind of saw them as boyfriend and girlfriend. They had that dynamic like the same like my dad had with his boyfriends. And so I was sitting there and I watched it. But when he was around his brothers, everything was gay. That's so gay. How are you acting so gay? You're acting so gay. Man, you're so gay. And I'm like, dude, come on. Who are you trying to fool with this machismo thing? It's just really sad. But I think that's what Christian suppression does. It makes you afraid to explore a very natural aspect, especially since sex is not linear and it's not either or. It's very complex. And if we don't get a chance to explore that, it will come out unnatural ways. Just ask a priest. It will come out unnaturally.
And nobody takes the chair. Have you got any more questions in the description? I don't know. Let's have a look.
Yeah, hold on. There's a question. How do you respond to a Christian who legitimizes God's genocides by arguing other contemporary gods were far worse? That's a really good one, Scarlett.
A form of special pleading, really.
It is a form of special pleading. And even if that's the case, why does that matter? If one dude up the street killed 2 kids and another one up the street killed 10, does that mean that the guy who killed 2 kids should just get a free pass because he only killed 2? I mean...
You've been muted. You're muted.
It doesn't matter if... one dude killed 2 kids and one kid killed 10. They both took lives, and I don't understand whether this is greater or either or evil. I don't care. This dude has killed millions of people in the Bible, either by his own hand or inadvertently or through his messengers. Does it matter if this guy over here killed 2 million? If he killed 1 million, he's still a genocidal monster. I don't understand those type of arguments. They're ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's not only how many deaths are attributed to this deity or this deity. It's also the character of the deity as contained in the narrative. And in the Christian Bible, you have this very heinous Old Testament God who is no different than any of the other gods of old. There's really no distinguishing him. And if people read the Old Testament, it's funny. There's the god Baal, or Baal, however you want to pronounce it, Baal, it appears throughout the book. And the interesting thing is, every time Baal appears, the Christian Yahweh, the Christian God, says, "Don't worship that God." He never says, "Because that God's not real, don't worship that God." He says, "Don't worship that God because I'm your God." Basically, it's a tacit admission that there's other gods. That don't worship that God because I'm your God specifically. that means there's other gods out there to worship. And the Christian, or excuse me, the Old Testament God, the Jewish God, never said those gods didn't exist. It wasn't until later Christian theology said, well, other religions are false, so their gods don't exist. But if you go into the mindset of the people who were reading those texts at the time, it was really more of a choice between which god to worship. And then it's not what God is more righteous or more evil, which God has caused the most harm, but which God could give you the most, right? They worship the one that could protect them, the one that could give them a nice harvest every year, that kept the crops from withering away, you know. So the God they worship is the one that they felt gave them the most. So it doesn't really matter so much in terms of ethics, but when you do want to analyze the morality of the gods, then you have to go into the narrative, look at his character, and see how does that God behave, and how does he respond to situations, moral situations. And I would say that the Old Testament God is horrible in terms of passing tests of morality. The fact that the book of Job is one of my favorite books because it is so eloquently written. It is one of the best written of all the Old Testament books. It is the closest to literature in terms of writing that you're going to get in all of the Bible. And what's interesting about that story is that God actually, you know, makes a wager with Satan that, you know, who can cause Job the most harm, and God's betting Satan can't kill this person or can't kill that person, and he's kind of egging him on, and it's funny because when you think about it, Satan is only responsible for 10 deaths in the entire Bible, and they're all in the book of Job, right? And he only did it because God, you know, bet him that he couldn't do it, and he did it to prove. And so it's God that set up the wager in the first place. And so ultimately, those deaths are also God's responsibility, the Old Testament God, Yahweh's responsibility, as much as they are Satan's fault, because they're in it together, you know. One's the driver, and one's the guy hanging out with the Tommy gun going bada 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 bada, shooting up all the houses as they drive by, right? So you can't really say that's a moral God.
Tristan, it is funny because I often see like this picture of the Job story. And a quick aside, there's a girl, you know, I write screenplays, and there's a friend of mine who writes screenplays, and she actually almost got this one option. It was called Faith, right? And it was based on the Job story, and it was a modern retelling of the Job story. And I was like, seriously, honey, seriously, this is the story that you want to take into a modern era and translate? Because I think it won't translate the same way in the year 2014. Because it does. It has this woman who's she's a book author, and she's famous, and, you know, God and the devil, and God's in a white suit, and the devil's in a black suit, and they're just hanging out, and the devil's smoking a cigar, and God's, you know, pretty chaste, he's not doing anything, and they're walking, he goes, this woman loves me. He's like, oh, she's got a famous book, she got great kids, she got great husband, you take all that stuff, she'll hate you. And God was like, take it all away. So she goes through crap, man. She gets cancer at the end of the thing. You know, her one son committed suicide. Her husband's sleeping with her best friend. He divorces her, treats her like crap. And the whole time, like, and at one point she's like, God sucks. And devil's like, ha ha, and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, that would be like if I took my kids, and I love my kids, and I took my kids and I said, you know, to my friend, my neighbor who's got 3, you know, I bet you my kids love me more than your kids love you, and I can prove it. I'm going to do all this stuff to them. I'll smack them around. I'll put them in an oven. I'm going to chain them in the basement. I'm going to do all this stuff to them, and they're still going to be like, Mommy, I love you, and I'll be hot in your face after, and this is supposed to be good, and this is a moral, and it's crazy to me. Like, did y'all hear about the story of the lady who drowned her daughter? And she tried to poison herself, and she tried to poison her son. The daughter, of course, died. They didn't die. And you go to these forums of Christians, and they're going, well, you can't blame God, and you can't blame the book. And it's like, no, you can't blame her. I think she has some issues. But you can at least point to the source material and say, because what happened was she went to a church thing, and the sermon was, "Be as faithful as Abraham," So how can we not point to the source material and say, if this had not been put into her head, would she have done this particular thing? Now, if she was insane, maybe she would have done something else without that particular source material, but you can at least point to the source material and say, that could have something to do with it. You're talking about a lifestyle, because they were saying, well, you wouldn't blame Grand Theft Auto for the fact people steal cars. Grand Theft Auto is not a life guide. The Bible is. You can't compare the two. You're talking about people who are supposed to be faithful, and you show your faith through this. And this is so. You see what I'm saying? What do you think, Essence?
I was going to lead into a different area sort of thing. I was going to discuss how I actually think that the New Testament gets off far too lightly. I mean, you look at Ephesians 6:5, slaves obey your earthly masters with fear and respect and sincerity in your heart, as you would your Lord Christ. And we just wash all over that sort of thing. Also, the fact is, the reason why is because, yes, the amount of atrocities in the New Testament is far less. I can admit that. Until you consider the text, which for no apparent reason just never made it into the actual Bible, because there are other texts that discuss the infant stage of Jesus, which is missing out of all the texts. There are actually infant texts. They never made it in. Why? Because the Jesus they described was extremely vile. I mean, one of them, this is the infant Gospel of Thomas, not to be confused with the Gospel of Thomas, which is a Gnostic text. The infant Gospel of Thomas, Jesus strikes down a child because he bumps into him. And in another one, he makes another child extremely old because he splashes water over him whilst he makes the sparrows on the riverside. So, there's been some very selective parts removed from the text which you can go back and see. So, I do think the New Testament gets a lot of praise, oh, look at all this moral stuff. Half of the moral stuff was never in there. For example, Jesus and the adulterer, it's not in the original text of John. It was added after, that there was the one part I could really get behind, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Not part of the original text. So yes, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So
yeah, I recently published an article on my blog, advocatusatheist.blogspot.com. In what it was Jesus an original moral philosopher? Because the question I asked myself was, did he actually ever teach anything moral that was, from him personally? Not if he's the Son of God, he should have some things to say about morality, but he never did. He basically just restates Mosaic laws. His Sermon on the Mount is just a retelling of a reinterpretation of the laws of Moses. And really, everything that Jesus says in the entire New Testament, it can be pulled from the Jewish teachings of the Old Testament and of the Torah. There's nothing that he ever says that you cannot already find in Jewish thought, or, for that matter, in Buddhism or Hinduism in terms of morality. He never said anything original. And so you can't look towards him as a moral authority. He just had nothing to say on the subject. And I got a lot of flack from that, but I keep telling Christians who want to challenge me, go ahead and point out a verse of Jesus that is could be considered a morally original philosophy of Jesus Christ himself. And then what I always do is I will go back to the Old Testament, pull out where he's getting that from, where Jesus is, or the writers who wrote Jesus are getting that teaching from, and show them that it's already there. And that's just a brilliant way to prove that the guy had, if he existed, I'm not convinced he is. Well, I'm not a mythicist per se. I believe there was a historical figure, but I believe that the New Testament contains a legend of him, and that nothing in the New Testament can be considered historical. That's my take. But
I
yeah.
certainly agree. I mean, it's just whenever you ask apologists, what evidence do you actually have for the the actual physical existence of Christ, who, okay, remove the miracles, still went around and did these sermons and preached all these things, and they go, well, every academic agrees that he was a historical figure. And then it just goes back each step. It keeps going back and back and back. And so far, yeah, okay, I can agree there was probably a man called Jesus once. There's probably a guy called any name. And maybe some people heard about him at a party somewhere and heard that, this guy did something like this, and then ends up creating an entire mythos around him. I don't buy any of the stories either. Any of the micro-narratives, miracles or no miracles, I don't buy them. I don't buy the, people were following him in the hundreds. I don't buy any of that sort of thing. I just, yeah.
And, if we bring it back to the morality aspect too, don't you just love how when you start to point out certain things, like the big thing that I just recently got into Atheist with was the slavery thing. And so I almost feel like they huddle in corners when we make a point, and they go, okay, they did the slavery thing. What are we going to say? We're going to say they were indentured servants. Oh, okay, so they go out en masse, and they start spreading the idea that they were indentured servants, and then they feel like it's their coup de grace. And I'm like, no, honey. Even if you could say that they were indentured servants, and there probably were some that were, that didn't mean all of them were. That didn't mean they weren't beaten. That does not mean that they weren't people who weren't raped and their children sold and all this stuff. It's like they're trying to whitewash something very nasty because in their attempt to try to justify the slavery aspect.
That's just
and there was even one, wait a minute, Peter, there was one where they even said something about how, what was it? Oh, he didn't do away with slavery because he was trying not to get into the culture, mess with the culture's free will. So what he did was he put laws in place to regulate it. I was like, what? That's the newest thing I've heard. And I was like, was that what happened after the second huddle when you tried to do the indentured servant thing and that didn't work, so you came with this and that's the new thing? Because that's some stupid shit. That doesn't make sense.
Jesus didn't give any regulation laws either. It was all Paul, who was enlightened by God, that wrote that letter. However, the only laws that dictate how slavery should occur are from the Old Testament. So you get the statement from the New Testament, then you should go back to the Old Testament and see the laws behind the said slavery. You say the servitude, etc. It was only for male Hebrews. They were the only ones that would be let go after 8 years. If it was a woman or a man of a different nation, that was it. They were trapped. And the way that you could actually keep a male Hebrew was marry him to a female slave, and then you kept the female slave and any of the children. They were permanently your property. However, the man could pledge his servitude for the rest of his life, in which you pierce his ear in the village square, and then he becomes yours for the rest of life. As for the treatment, you go to the passage about how you can beat your slave to the inch of his life as long as he survives for 3 days after. That's the sort of treatment. So it wasn't, servants in the sense that we think today. It matches every aspect of slavery that we, as a Western nation, have a concept for. So, yeah.
Okay. So, and do you mind if I go back and just read part of my article? I wrote five things that would have made Jesus an original moral philosopher at that time.
Just quickly, if you want to add a link, I'll add it to the description so other people can read everything. If you just put the link in the side there, I can link it in the description.
Sure. So. Okay, so I'll just write my blog link.
So I'd stop the flow.
No, it's okay. All right, so there's 5 things that I narrowed down that Jesus could have said but didn't that would have made him an original moral philosopher. And the first thing is that slavery is wrong, period. And there's no situation or excuse which could ever justify slavery, so don't even try it. People are not property, items, or objects to be owned, plain and simple. And number 2, treat each other as you would want to be treated, and especially don't abuse women and children or each other, ever. He who lords his strength over others shows a weakness of character. We should prefer strong characters and compassionate hearts to weak characters with intolerant minds. Number 3, women and men are equal in every way in the eyes of the Lord, even if your skills or abilities are not equal. You should never devalue another person for not living up to your standards. Equality is about not restricting the rights of others because they are different. It is about celebrating the differences. Intolerance is restricting the rights of others because they do not fit into the narrow, insular, cookie-cutter confines of your social expectations, and therefore you and/or society shows favoritism to one group over another. Giving rights to one group while withholding those same rights to another group creates an imbalance in society, and everything will be in danger of toppling over. Allow for the differences, love one another, and help each other, and equality will follow. Number 4, eating meat is morally wrong and is a type of murder. Be vegetarian instead. You will live longer and there will be less suffering in the world. Number 5, homosexuality is natural as heterosexuality, and you should not fear or mistreat those different than yourself, regardless of their gender or sexual preference. In fact, there are those born both male and female. Do not force them to be one or the other. Forcing people to be what you want them to be is unloving. Instead, accept them for who they are and love them unconditionally. And those are the 5 things that Jesus could have said, but never did. That would have made him an original moral philosopher of that period.
Well, and you know, you make I kept high-fiving you throughout your conversation or what you were saying there because you were hitting the ball out of the park. He was supposed to be this amazing new thinker, and yet he brought really nothing new to the table. I'm so glad you pointed that out.
Because it's crucified. He should have taken the opportunity for, oh, to hell with it. I'm going to be crucified anyway. Let's just
so
yeah. What they should do is just have Jesus Christ on the cross, but one hand free with like a Big Mac, stuffing it in his face. I'm eating meat just to spite you all.
Exactly. Because that was such a brilliant point, and that's definitely some things I'm going to be bringing up when I talk to people. Because I'm like, that's what's truly forward thinking. To me, that philosophy is the equivalent of finding a 2,000-year-old iPod with God's message on it. That's how forward that would be. But people keep thinking of him as this forward. He was not forward thinking. He still, even though he deferred to women and had women in his crew, he still had ideas about how women were inferior in some ways. And it's like he taught lessons of love and tolerance, but at the same time talked about separating families and bringing swords, and it was just insane, you know.
We have another question. Do we think that indoctrination should be banned? And I'd add on to this, if so, how would you go about it? Because, of course, it's a very difficult situation.
Yes, indoctrination. I think there's some layers to this that we have to address. Indoctrination is actually very good. I read a lot of articles on bioethics. And one of the things that I was reading was the indoctrination of doctors into the certain types of medical practices and beliefs that they hold as physicians, and that they have to actually be indoctrinated to believe like that this drug works or this drug works better than another drug, because as physicians they would always have to be looking for a better drug that would work the best for their patient, but there's just no time, energy, or money to always be investigating what pharmaceutical companies are creating. And pharmaceutical companies, of course, are only pitching certain types of drugs to hospitals and stuff. And so this article was really fascinating because it was talking about the importance of indoctrination on medical physicians, because if they didn't have this belief that this is the go-to drug, then they would be uncertain, or they would be placed in a position of uncertainty where they would be like, well, I don't actually know if this is the right drug for you. So what they have to do is they have to believe that it will be the right drug for you so they can administer it. And then if it doesn't work, they'll try something else. But without that belief, they're stuck in a position where they don't quite know which drug will work best, and they're wasting time deliberating about it, and so it becomes this time saver. And I think in society there's lots of different types of indoctrination. Whether it's a cultural indoctrination, racial, or religious, but religion is like a hodgepodge of it's a melting pot of lots of different cultural ideas throughout history, and so religious indoctrination is really hard to fend against. It involves hitting the indoctrination and subsequent inculcation comes at you from all angles. Comes at you from the social angle, from the personal angle, from the family angle, from from the community angle, and so to make it illegal would be really hard to do, because you'd be outlawing lots of little things that you need to just get by in society. But what I would say is that we can not make excuses for it. If that indoctrination harms somebody or causes them to do harm to others, then we still must hold them accountable. And I think that's the only thing we can do with such indoctrination, and then find ways to maybe limit the sorts of indoctrination that are going on, to find workarounds, to address, to provide maybe mental health care for people that might be affected by it, that you predict would bring harm to other people, like deprogramming suicide bombers, young Muslim girls, suicide bombers, deprogramming them because they've been told to wear the vest that will explode. But there's, if you can catch them before they do it, and there's been examples of this, you can deprogram them, and just to provide mental health care for those type of situations where you can where the person needs the help to get past whatever programming they've been given. And that's how I would address indoctrination for the most part.
And Tristan, there are several laws in America, in certain states, where if children are killed due to a parent withholding medical care, that they can be, it's sort of like there's specific laws that basically says if a parent is neglectful and a child dies, they will go to jail unless it is for religious reasons. And I don't think there should be that exception when it comes to indoctrination. Because my thing is, as an atheist, if I starve my child, I would go to jail. As a theist, if you starve your child because you're fasting and they die, you can get away with that. There should not be a special exception for the death of children based on people's religious ideas. Now, that said, I would say that we can't really, it's a slippery slope, because let's say I'm as an atheist, the way that I'm raising my children is that, how do I put this? I want them to be free thinkers. I want to teach them how to think, not what to think. And so, but by that token, my daughter knows I'm an atheist, and she'll say things. One day she came to me and she said, "Mommy, I'm an atheist just like you." I said, "No, hon, you are not an atheist. That's an adult label." I said, "Now what you can do is explore different ideas. And if you decide you want to read a Bible or Quran or whatever, you can do that. And I won't even influence that. Go to maybe a Unitarian church or to people who have these particular faiths, ask your questions. You make your decisions. I'm going to give you the ability to be a skeptic. Therefore, if you read something and you think this is BS in there, you will call BS on it." And I think when you give the kids the tools to do that, they're less likely to be ensnared by religion. I wouldn't say they wouldn't, but they're less likely to be. And that's the only thing I can do and provide as a parent are the tools to make sound decisions. And I can't force them to make a decision like mine. I told her not to call herself an atheist, just like I don't think a child should be called a Buddhist or a Baptist or a Catholic. Don't call yourself that. I'm like, but she knows how I think about things, and she'll ask me. She'll say, "What do you think about the Noah's Ark story?" I think it's full of crap, little girl. That story is, no, that doesn't make sense. Well, here's why Mommy thinks it does not make sense. But at the end of the day, do you see what I'm saying?
I do the same thing with my daughter. Is she'll ask, I want her to figure out how to think on her own. So when she asks me, "What do I think?" I say, well, I give her my opinion reluctantly, in a reluctant tone, And then immediately after, I say, well, what do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I want her to search out her own answers. I don't want her just to rely on my answers. And
Exactly.
sometimes she says she agrees with me, but sometimes she comes up with her own explanation. It may not make any sense, but to her, that's her explanation. And I say, okay, well, that's good. You know, as long as they're asking questions,
Exactly.
and as long as you give them that arena, as long as you give them that ability to do it without being judged. I will say this about indoctrination. I do not like the inculcation part, the part where your child must, like you said, must be a Baptist child or a Christian child. And I really do not agree with Christian parents who, when the child comes and says, does God exist, that they say, yeah, and you better believe it, because if you don't, you go to hell. Or if you don't, they don't necessarily threaten with hell, but they say, well, you better believe it, because maybe Santa won't come and bring you Christmas presents this year. I've actually heard that one done to one of my friends.
That's horrible.
So they have to be Christian so they can get the presents from Santa, and Santa's not even a Christian icon. But in their mind, it's a way to enslave the child to their ideology by making them think the same thing, by blackmailing them with the presents thing, because they don't want their child to lose their soul, but I don't agree with that. I think you shouldn't tell the child what to think.
Mm-hmm.
You can educate the child and teach them the importance of asking questions and investigating those questions to find their own answers.
Tristan, my daughter, she came to me and she said, "You think Santa Claus is real, don't you?" I said, Mommy does not think Santa Claus is real, but what do you think about Santa Claus? She's like, well, I think he's real. I'm like, I'm not going to browbeat her, right? At some point she'll understand Santa Claus is not real. She knows that Mommy gave her answer. I was honest, and I let her make up her own mind. At this point, she decides Santa Claus is real. I mean, I can't really do much about that.
How old is she?
She is 8, going to be 9.
Okay, because I think I ruined Santa Claus for my daughter this past Christmas. She was only 4, but this is what happened. Okay, I think she's already figured it out, and it was because of my blunder. What had happened was we had already bought the Christmas presents, and just a few weeks before Christmas, a new toy came out that she really, really wanted, and we already bought the presents, so of course we couldn't buy that new toy. And so Christmas rolls over, she opens all the presents, and we had been telling her, and her school, she goes to an international school here. The school had done a Christmas party, and the fake Santa came and gave out little gifts to everyone. But they kept telling the children that Santa brings what you ask for. You write the list. So like just 3 days before Christmas, she writes on the top of her list the new toy that came out. And so she has it in her mind that Santa's going to bring her that toy no matter what. And then Christmas rolls around, and she opens up a couple presents to disappointed sighs, tosses them back under the tree, doesn't want that, and then she's like, "Where's my present?" And then she kind of figured out in her mind that what she was being told didn't fit, like the Santa didn't bring her the present. And she asked me, "Why didn't Santa come to our house?" And I was like, should I lie to her and say it's because it's Japan and Santa doesn't come to give Japanese kids presents? Or should I just forget this silly myth and just tell her, well, Santa's not real? And I just said, well, what do you think? And she says, I don't think Santa's real. And I said, well, yeah, I don't think he's real either. Yeah. And in that situation, I was agreeing with her, but I was confirming her assumption. By showing her that I had the same one, but I didn't force her into making that choice, And that's the thing.
It's sort of like I don't want to browbeat her and say no. Here's all the evidence and start doing just fact checks and showing her pictures. It's because I'm like, at some point she will come to that conclusion herself, and so I just don't want to, because there's not an adult today who believes Santa Claus is real. So at some point she will come to that conclusion. I'll let her come to it in her time, but if she continues to ask me, what do you think, I will say, I don't think he's real, honey. What do you think? And I'm hoping one day she'll go, I don't think he's real. And she'll come to that conclusion all the time.
All I can say is I feel so young.
You don't have to worry about kids.
Yeah.
Only at university, so
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about whether or not you're ruining a human life.
Exactly. But speaking of kids, there was a question, and I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this person's name, but it's UY Scooty says, "What are your thoughts on antinatalism?"
oh, I believe I know what that is. That's the idea that you shouldn't have any children, isn't that correct?
I think that's what it is.
I dispute this sort of junk.
Yeah, I was looking it up and I was trying to figure out what it is, and it says a philosophical position that assigns a negative value to birth, standing in opposition to natalism. And my opinion about that thing is people should make it's like people take stances on stuff that I think is ridiculous. It's just like when you meet people who go, you know, they don't like conservatism and the emphasis on marriage. So they go, screw marriage. Marriage sucks. Do away with marriage. I'm like, no, I think that it should be a matter of choice of what you want to do in life. If you want to be single for the rest of your life, be single. If you want to marry, be married. You want to have 3 wives, have 3 wives. I think people should be able to make those choices without somebody going, you know, you're contributing to this X, Y, Z. You know, if it's something that does do something negative or impact negatively, then point it out. But I don't think, I mean, because here's the thing. Yes, we could all stop having kids, and at some point the population would even out, but at some point we'd have to go back to having children to keep our, you know, to keep humans on the planet. So I think what it is we should do it responsibly. I don't think it's responsible to have 15 kids in an overburdened world, but I don't think it's wrong to say, well, I would like to have a child or 2, cap it to that. You know what I'm saying? If that's your desire.
You look at developed countries, you do see there's a sort of trend that they do as they start developing education, especially female education, that the rise does start stabilising out. I mean, in the UK, it's actually, of British nationals, the birth rate is actually slowly going down. We're actually losing people. However, because we also take in people from other nations, because their religious values are still having more children, so overall Britain's remaining kind of stable, increasing very sort of slowly. So, you know, it isn't a case of, oh my god, it's going to be the end of the world if we don't stop having children. No, it stabilizes. However, we're having a lot of issues in developing countries, especially the BRIC countries, you know, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, China, and, you know, we are having issues there in fighting religious fundamentalism, and then also, you know, currently underdeveloped third world countries as well, you know, Africa, etc., in the way that we are having challenges there for birth control and education of women. So, you know, that's fundamentally what we need doing. We have enough resources, and if we do plan out our systems better, we could have such, you know, we could maximize our output of energy, of you know, food, etc., to such an extent that it's not really an issue. The fact is we're so ineffective and we're so set in our ways, and there's such a resistance ideology, particularly from the Christian right, when it comes to these sort of matters, that you've got to challenge and fight this change. So that's where the issue lies.
And don't you think, too, don't you find it interesting that when it comes to things like antinatalism, that it seems to be a knee-jerk reaction to something? Like, for example, if the conservatives say this is a good thing, the knee-jerk is to say, no, this is an evil thing, as opposed to actually looking at the situation as a whole. And do you see what I'm saying? It's like, oh, we believe birth is good. You do well. We believe birth is bad. Can we just, why do we as human beings have this knee-jerk reaction to go totally to one side, as opposed to looking at something and finding a place of balance? I think we're hyper-reactionary as a species. If somebody that we don't like is doing something, it must be bad, right? And so we're going to say over here, well, let's be anti this.
Yeah. Well, antinatalism also is a philosophical position. It's a position of whether or not you think or believe that you should have children or not, versus the reason why you would think that. And the reasons would be things like overpopulation, or like limited food, and limited land, or, you know, confining or restricting factors that would make it hard to raise healthy children. But as a philosophical position, you have to look at the reasons to justify that position. And I don't think there are logical reasons that could actually justify antinatalism as a position unto itself. You would always have other factors to consider, and so that's what we have been actually discussing, is what are those other factors, right? So yeah, I don't think it would be a valid position, but it might be something worth thinking about if you are concerned about overpopulation and things like that. So, or just even the moral consequences of bringing a child, if you're a pessimist, bringing a child into a world which you view as suffering. But if you're an optimist, there is the balance between the two, and I think that's where the rational view lies.
Okay, so we've now got a question that actually has directly a position to do with the book, and the question is, are you expecting Christian groups to write and publish their own book containing conversions back to Christianity as a literary rebuttal?
No, because what's interesting about the way we set this book up is that the pitch we give is that it's the atheist testimony, and Christians already have testimonies. In many of the testimonies book, I mean, go into the Christian bookstore sometime and look at how in their section of testimonies, they actually have a section for just testimonials, where it's just people talking about how they found God, or how they found faith, or how they came to Jesus, and they have hundreds of books already published on this, and some of them, probably the most famous one everyone will recognize is C.S. Lewis. He wrote his own I left the faith. I was atheistic for a while, and then I realized Jesus was the true God type thing all over again. And so that's probably the most notorious example. And he ends up going on and calling atheism a schoolboy's philosophy. He didn't take atheism seriously, and he was very condescending towards those who didn't believe in God. And of course, I went back and analyzed C.S. Lewis's spiritual writings, and I read all of his letters, including the ones when he was an atheist, and I just never think he was truly an atheist. I don't want to make the no Scotsman fallacy here, but from reading all of his letters, it seemed like he had some doubts, but he was still in the Christian mindset. And it seemed like he stopped going to church for a while, but that's because he was busy with other things. It was never that he stopped believing in God. He just had some questions, and then he, figured out some answers to those questions, and then he wrote some more books addressing those. And I never felt in all of the reading I did of C.S. Lewis that he ever was truly a non-believer in the proper sense. And somebody can challenge me on that, but it just doesn't seem that way from his writing. So, but Christians still consider it a prime example of a person who stepped back from faith and then came back. And there's already the Christian testimonials out there. So we didn't really. At least I don't anticipate anybody writing a anti-atheist testimonial by retreading the same testimonial ground by writing a re-testimonial statement. That seems kind of redundant.
The testimony wars.
Yeah, but Tristan, here's the thing, though. You notice how they mirror what we do. And even though they may already be doing a form of it, like if we decide to do something and they're going to come counter us because for some reason they feel victimized when we do particular things. So even though they already have testimonials, I could see them writing a book going, how I was an atheist and now I see the light. I could see that being a theme. Only because they're trying to counter our ideas and do it specifically, whereas the testimonial thing is more of a Christian thing. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like they tend to want to combat our ideals when we come up with certain ideas, and then act like they came up with it themselves.
And it goes back to the thing where they constantly think they're in a debate with us when we're not, like, oh, I got to point up on the atheist, ha ha ha, you can't answer that question, ha ha ha, checkmate atheist, and you're like, I wasn't even talking to you about that, subject. Well, so they're constantly trying to one-up us. But I think that's a defense mechanism. I think that's because they don't want to actually engage with our material because that causes doubt, and if they have reasons to doubt enough, they might become atheists. So the way to approach that situation from their point of view is to immediately go into apologetic mode, look at the atheist argument, take it for what it is on the surface, and then create a straw man on top of that, so that they don't actually get into the roots of what the real reasons are. They can just skip over that and beat the straw man to death, right?
It's all about self-justifying beliefs and keeping that bubble sacred.
Yeah.
Well, and C.S. Lewis, one thing I have to say, I see what you're saying about C.S. Lewis, but I also know that he had his own, and I forget the name of the apologetic book he wrote, but he was saying how that he believes in a theistic society, and went so far as to say that he believes everybody should be happy and that nobody should be sad in this theistic society. And I remember when I came across this particular idea, let me see if I can find the name of it. When I came across this particular idea, I was like, so how is it going to manage that? Give everybody Prozac in this theistic society? Because there's going to be days when people aren't cheerful. There's going to be days when people are unhappy. I think there was a movie that was put out, not Elysium. Was it Elysium? That kind of hinted on that kind of idea. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, with the space in Elysium, it's the utopia, and everyone on Earth is in the ghetto.
Okay, Tristan's.
Matt Damon, is that the one you're talking about?
Oh God, what is the name of that movie? That wasn't it. It'll come to me. I'm just kind of brain fried because I ran around my kids today, and you know how that is when you trying to do something and you just got tired out from your kids. But hold on.
Is it the one with Matt Damon?
It's not the Matt Damon one. That's a recent one. The one I'm thinking about was kind of old. And it was based on people taking a particular drug to stay happy, and if you didn't take the drug, then you would be arrested or something like that. And Equilibrium. That's what it was called, Equilibrium. Did you ever see that movie?
No, I haven't seen Equilibrium. No.
But yeah, C.S. Lewis basically, Mere Christianity, that was the name of the book by C.S. Lewis. And in Mere Christianity, he talks about this utopian theistic world, and he even goes on to talk about what he thought the properties of God were. So it's sort of like, I think it was very conflicted if he was a non-believer, because in one sense he could come up with, I think it'd be perfect if we lived like this, but on the other, as you pointed out, there were other aspects where he was just kind of like on the fence, or questioning, you know.
Yeah, I think he was on the fence.
Yeah.
But I think C.S. Lewis viewed that as dangerous because of where that would lead philosophically if he let himself go the secular way.
Yeah.
But he wasn't a sophisticated philosopher. He was a really great writer, a very imaginative apologist, and a brilliant children's author. But as a philosopher,
no.
He's not anywhere near what I would consider a scholarly level philosopher. So.
Well, because even Mere Christianity was a great read. If you read it as an apologetic book, it was a great read. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I could go through it more than, like, say, what's the one about? Oh, there he's back. Than a Ray Comfort book. I could go through it more than a William Lane Craig book, you know, without wanting to throw it across the wall. Like, what the?
Are you watching Steve Shive's?
Yes, I'm watching this
review of Ray Comfort.
And that just
so
choke somebody, man. That is I mean, out of all the books of an Atheist Read series, Ray Comfort is the one that you scream at the screen the most. Yeah. C.S. Lewis, I found myself going, I could see him thinking that. That's cool, whatever.
C.S. Lewis did write a pretty heavy apologetic, I would say, theology book. His book Miracles addresses lots of Christian concepts head on, and it's probably his biggest book that he wrote on Christianity in terms of page count. So that Miracles is definitely worth reading. I highlighted the hell out of that book when I was a Christian, and then I went back and reread it as an atheist and going, what was I thinking? Like, why did I even highlight this passage? It doesn't make any sense. And so, yeah.
Will McKenzie says here, question. So would you say Lewis' atheist phase was more of a crisis of faith than a true conversion?
That's right. I think it's a crisis of faith that he had in his life. Just a personal.
I guess it's of course difficult for atheists to know if they have become atheists, especially if they've always been part of church culture, because they may not understand, you know, is this atheism? Or is this? Yeah, they may not understand. They may misinterpret how they're feeling, etc. Like you stated that he just sort of phased out going to church as much. Maybe that to him felt like it was, you know, a life without God, when not every Christian does go to church, etc. So.
But and the reason why I would classify it as a crisis of faith and not true atheism is because the fact that he realized his belief in God was waning snapped him back right into faith because it worried him so much. Now, if you become an atheist, you realize that there was nothing to worry about in the first place. It's all illusions and figments of your imagination, and that's, from an atheist perspective, that's the realization you would have. So the fact that he snapped back into faith because he was fearful of losing his faith, it seems to represent a crisis of faith more than an actual deconversion, a full-on deconversion.
Hey, and Scarlett makes mention here that we skipped a couple of questions, but before we go to those questions real fast, I want to say, too, that when we talk about atheism and people who claim to have been atheists and Christians, like with Cameron, for example, what I noticed is with these people, like C.S. Lewis, I think he might have legitimately believed he was an atheist. Cameron is lying through his ass. And the reason why I say he is lying is because he brings up straw man type style atheism ideas. Like, I used to believe evolution was true. I used to, you see what I'm saying? He's saying things that Christian thinks atheists would say. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't think he truly ever was.
There's also that idea that he says that, you know, without believing God, I would go around killing and raping and murdering everyone. He actually did say that with Ray Comfort. It's like, so you claim to be atheist once? Why aren't you in prison?
And what about the whole crocoduck thing, too? The crocoduck thing that's not even close to anything, evolutionary ideas. It's like he had no understanding of evolution. He didn't understand what atheism itself means, which is just a lack of belief of gods. It has no other type of thing. You can attach things to, like, I consider myself a atheist activist, but you can be an atheist and not an activist. You can just be an atheist. You don't have to tag anything else to it, right? So if he's going to say, I was an atheist, but I did this and I hated God, I'm like, oh, I know your ass is lying, because no atheist says that. He's lying. He was not, and I think what they do, and I've even ran across the poll types that come and they say, oh, I'm an atheist, and then they start arguing you from a theistic viewpoint. And I always call bullshit on that. I say, you are not an atheist, hon. You are saying you're an atheist because you think I'll identify with you and agree with you because you're saying you're an atheist. You are a theist pretending to be an atheist, and it is transparent. Why did they do that? Why did they do that?
One of the differences between, because I do mention the fact that I was once religious. However, the difference is I don't say I was once religious, therefore I'm right. I say I was once religious, this is how I felt, and then I attempt to justify how I felt and point out how this is backed up by what Scripture says, for example. Self-deprecation within Genesis, the whole idea that it is practically an abusive relationship. It does meet that dynamic going on. It demeans you, it destroys you, makes you feel worthless, and then it comes back and says, I am the only one that loves you, through me you get value, you're not really worthy of me, however, but I will treat you well, etc. It is the fist and flower makeup of things, and I do attempt to link that and then bring that forward, sort of thing. So
fist and flower. Is that a British euphemism? I've just started
using it. It's the whole idea of abusive, and then later on bring flowers.
Okay. Well, maybe I haven't heard that.
No, it's not a euphemism. It's not anything. I sometimes make stuff up on the spot. It's just a way to explain things. So.
Oh,
Hey, there
okay.
was a question about whether who do we think is doing more harm, Islam or Christianity? Which religion is doing more harm? And if I were going to raise my hand and answer that first, I would say I think all religions and falsely dogmatic practices are harmful in their way. Christianity is harmful in the fact that, at least with Islam, the harm it does is very apparent to a lot of people. You see people cutting off hands, you see young girls getting killed because they marry Christians, you see the stuff. But Christianity is more of a passive-aggressive underlying thing where they're trying to put into place a theocracy. They're trying to do it based on patriotism and emotionalism and things like that. So I think as far as its insidious nature, Christianity is kind of doing more harm because it's seen as not as harmful, in my opinion.
And I think Islam does more harm to its own people. It does more harm to the Muslim people. It's the Muslim schoolgirls that they're rounding up and shooting. It's not, you know, they're not going out and finding atheists. Well, they do put atheists in jail and will execute them in certain
as well.
Islamic countries. But the majority of the people that are being harmed by Islam are its own adherents, its own believers, the Muslim people themselves. And even the fact that it is such a rigid religious mindset, and that it doesn't separate politics and religion. I think that's the great thing about Christianity, is that over the course of history, perhaps Christianity has done more harm overall because it's been around longer. But it has evolved. And if Christians don't believe in evolution, all they have to look at is their own religion. Christianity has evolved. It has been able to separate itself from secular politics and create its own political goals. And it's now an entity unto itself, when it used to be, like Islam is now, completely integrated with the politics of the time. You had the Queen's religion, the King's religion, you know, it was Christianity. And so then later you now have the separation of those ideals, and the politics and Christianity then end up having to create treaties with one another, as is in the case with, you know, Hitler and the Catholic Church, just in order to co-inhabit the same socio-political realm. And so it's become its own entity of a sort. It's evolved into a different thing. And I think along with that, Christianity has opened itself up to new inputs, new influences that it wouldn't have done prior. Because Christianity has gone through an enlightenment, or several actually. And I think what we're seeing with Islam right now is Islam is struggling through its own enlightenment. And an enlightenment actually forced upon Islam through technology and the shrinking of borders and the shrinking of the world through the internet and whatnot. So this new enlightenment has kind of forced Islam to deal with these issues that it probably wouldn't have had to do without the technology. But it can no longer protect itself. The borders have been encroached, and now they have to deal with these ideas. And because they haven't had the time to adjust like Christianity, there's a lot more violent reaction to it, or knee-jerk reaction to it, I would say. Yeah.
There was a time when they were ahead of us. I mean, you look at the 8th to 11th golden era, you know, they were open borders to everyone. Everyone was coming to Islam. Islam was ahead in the sciences. That's where we get our mathematic, you know, numerical system from, etc. And, you know, they were all behind that. And then in the 11th century, it just all sort of caved in on itself. And since then, it has just stagnated. It's not made any real headway. As you mentioned, European societies and the Western world has gone through multiple Enlightenment stages. You know, the Industrial Era, the Enlightenment period. It's gone through these multiple phases where things have changed. And I guess Islam.
Well, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, when you look at Islam too, it is a relatively young religion compared to Christianity in some ways. And so maybe if Christianity was as young as Islam, we would be seeing the same types of things. You know what I'm saying? Is there when you have a certain dogmatic style of philosophy that you live by, is there a kind of like, this is the progression? if Christianity was the same age? Would they be doing the same types of things? It makes me wonder. It does make me wonder. You know what I'm saying? So how much of it is just the youth of the religion itself, and why it's at its more barbaric stages? You see what I'm saying?
I'm just going to cheat, and I'm just going to say I just like Abrahamic religions.
Or I would actually add to that. I would specify that claim to say Abrahamic monotheisms.
I see, yes. The next question was transhumanism, I believe. What are our thoughts on transhumanism? And I believe that is the idea that we can engineer our physical being further with the usage of technology. Am I correct?
Technology and probably genetic manipulation.
Okay, I thought it was just the technological aspect. I thought it was, you know, cybernetic. I didn't think it was bioengineering.
Yeah, let's look at that up to make sure, because it could.
I always thought that'd be a cool premise for a book, you know, having two factions. As one's gone down the genetic engineering route, and the other one's gone down the cybernetic sort of route. I've always thought that'd be cool, but now I realise the one that's
both together, even if they may not technically be under that umbrella, because it's still some kind of genetic engineering, whether it's through some kind of engineering, whether it's genetics. But I would say that I'm for it. I'm for it because I think that people are so. It's just like when I see movies from the 80s when it talks about cloning, for example, or even if you look at movies from the 70s when they were talking about in vitro fertilization, they were freaking out about it. The babies born will be soulless and things like that. They're doing that with clones, and I'm thinking to myself, with each new thing where they feel like we're stepping on God's toes, they make it evil. Like a clone's going to be soulless and it's going to be killing everybody and all this stuff. I find that to be ridiculous, dude. It doesn't make sense. Only if you believe in the idea of a deity would you believe that a clone would be soulless. What's a soul? You know? And so it's sort of like people get freaked out about the idea, but I think it's cool. If it's going to elongate life, it's going to eradicate disease. I think by the time we get to that point, we may already be, you know, developing Luna in different places, on different moons, on different planets. I think if we start getting that far ahead, we're probably already in that kind of a place. So it wouldn't be even an overpopulation problem at that point, in my opinion. But, I mean, who knows? We could figure out a way to do that tomorrow. Then we're screwed. But if somebody said, hey, I want to be genetically engineered to be able to breathe underwater because I love scuba diving, if there is no problem with that, if it's not going to hurt the person and it's actually beneficial, then why not? That's my take. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's. I was just reading up on it. Yeah, it's just basically using technology. It doesn't matter if it's
cyborg or biological,
cybernetic enhancements or genetic enhancements. Just using science and technology to improve humanity. Yeah, I'd be all for it. If we could get rid of disease, if we could live longer. We'd have more time to be able to address the issues that we need to address. I think it also represents that the people who would be able to do those things are the people that have the information and the knowledge, and so that it would be less of a danger than if you were to give such technologies to ignorant peoples, which was always the worry with the atomic bomb, right? We're worried Iran's going to make it to bomb everybody, right? But Iran as a civilization is actually pretty civilized. I would say it's the religious theocrats that we have to worry about, not the Iranian people per se. But yeah, I'm all for it. If we could do it, we could cure lots of problems. Things like Alzheimer's disease, or figure out how to maybe have implants that could help with dialysis, or people who have kidney failure, or things that would keep them alive longer, or genetic diabetes, be able to help chronic illnesses. That's a side effect of evolving bigger brains. We evolve bigger brains and go into these modern lifestyles, but along with that comes the side effect of more chronic illnesses. So if we could get rid of those, I think that would improve life substantially for everyone.
And Tristan, here's the thing too, to the questioner too. Let's think about how we look at God and say, God sees suffering, He does nothing about it. Now, if we develop technologically and we can do things about suffering and we don't do anything, we can't point a finger at our so-called gods and say, you know, anything, because we have the ability to stop it. If we create technologies that make it a person with Alzheimer's not suffer, why not? If we can create a technology that helps the heart, why not? If we can create a technology that helps us live a bit longer so we don't die from, you know, debilitating illnesses that are associated with being old, why not? We should be trying to do those things. It's, to me, the moral thing to do, right?
If we become the miracle makers, then nobody can appeal to God that God, you know, cured them from their cancer or whatever. We will control all the miracles. We will become God-like. I think that questioner may have watched the recent Johnny Depp movie Transcendence. It seems like that movie dealt with this subject matter.
There's been the recent advancements in, you know, the cyborg eye, etc., and transplanting that in people. And, you know, the 3D printed hand, which is a very basic mechanical hand, but because it's so simple, it can be printed on a 3D printer for a rather low price, and, you know, that is, yeah, is helping out. I mean, I would be interested in the way the field goes. I mean, one area that I'm very interested in is specifically nano drones or nanobots, and, you know, the way that we could possibly replace people, you know, the enzymes that people have deficiencies in. For example, diabetics. Maybe you could create a nanobot that practically does the exact same behavior of the enzyme, and it replicates itself from the natural minerals that a person intakes. So maybe they have to take like a metal pill now and then that the robots just digest down and create more. So, you know, I'm rather interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah. Hey, Time Like 01, he didn't have a question, but I think he made an interesting comment. He said, and this goes back to what you said about the New Testament being one of the worst books. He says, the biggest atrocity of the New Testament is the introduction of hell, and that's worse than all the atrocities of the Old Testament combined. And so I thought that was pretty cool statement, and it's true. It's like the hell thing is what makes a woman kill her kids, thinking that she is doing right by God because she wants to go to heaven so bad, or her kids can go to heaven so bad, and she don't want them in hell, y'all. What a horrible device.
It's also the Christian misconception that there is such a concept as hell, because that stems from a theological misreading of the New Testament itself. Jesus said there is a hell, yes, but the way he got that concept was the way most Christians of the time. That's why you know Jesus wasn't a Jew, right? Because maybe the historical Jesus, if there was a character lurking in the penumbra of history, that guy might have been a Jew. But most of what Jesus says in the New Testament comes from a standpoint of an already developed Christian theology or Christology. And the concept of hell is actually 5 different ideas conglomerated together. You have Sheol, you have Hades, you have just various incarnations. I wrote a blog on it a while ago on all the different versions of hell that exist in the Bible that the Christians all put together into one concept. And it's only by this hook or crook little trick that they can even develop a coherent theory of hell, because there's not just one concept, there's multiple concepts. But they just, you know, snowball it all together and say, oh, we're going to choose to believe in this. And it's really a trick they play on themselves. They've convinced themselves there's such a place because they don't understand where these concepts come from, but they're all right there in the Bible, and it just proves that maybe perhaps a lot of Christians haven't read their Bibles closely enough. But it's something you can always go back to. It's what I did after I became an atheist. I went back and started rereading the New Testament, and I reread it as a work of literature instead of as a holy text, and I got more out of it than I would have if I was a believer. Because I had to read every sentence by sentence. I didn't just have to go to church and listen to the snippets that were preached to me and all the good bits that they tell. I could read the good and the bad together and come to my own conclusions about it. And I think that's what. And another good exercise to do is when you do read the New Testament, especially with the synoptic texts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and if you want to go into John, you can do John too. But that's kind of I would say that has too much Gnostic influence in it. But just go with the main three synoptic texts and just read them side by side. Have 3 translations of the Bible open at once, and just read the same narrative and just look at how different they are from one another. It's just quite telling. Not just to pick out the errors, but just to see what were the authors doing. Why were they making these changes? You know.
Hey, and it was brought up too that we're about to wind down. And I did want to go back to Beyond the Absence of Faith, but before I do that, I wanted to. It came to me as we were talking, and we were talking about differences and stuff, and Christianity, Islam, and stuff. But I think the larger point that we were making even earlier is that when it comes to the atheist experience, our deconversion stories, our experiences that are going to be similar or different, it's about being open. And openness will come from always being aware that you can speak about the elephant in the room, so to speak, but that the elephant in the room should not be of consequence. For example, I don't care if somebody calls me black or African American. For example, if I enter the room and you're going, or somebody goes, "Where's Alicia?" Well, what does she look like? She's got black red hair. She's about 5'2". She's wearing a little dress. They want to dance around the fact I'm black. Just say my ass is black. I'm black. You can say it. It's okay. Okay, that's the elephant in the room. But when somebody tries to use that elephant to say she's black, therefore she's ignorant. She's black, therefore she's ghetto. She's black, therefore she's on welfare. These are where we have the issues where it becomes a racial identity and not just a basic incidental of who Alicia is. And that's what we got to understand. Let's not be afraid to point out our differences. They can be celebrated and they can be good things. It's only when we look at the differences and try to say that makes us not human or dissimilar as a whole that it's wrong. And I think that when you try to when you won't look at differences, sometimes that's actually as bad as taking those differences and making them evil. But that's my thing in regards to the atheist community, our deconversion stories, and all this stuff. We're all the same, but we come from different places, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I want to share that link. I'm gonna put it also. Hold on.
Yeah, I just sent
I've got all the links. I've got all the buying links. I've got the.
Oh, you put it up?
Yeah, I got to put that up before this thing has started. I put .com. .co.uk and also the B&M.
Yeah, Barnes and Noble. B&M, yeah.
So they're all there.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, you jerks. It won't let me put it in there. It says, remove any web addresses. Try again. You bastard.
Just tell them to look in the description and, well, let's do it here because we're talking right now.
Yeah, exactly. Just look in the description.
Look in the description. You can buy the book there. I've purchased my copy, however, being in England, because I don't have a Kindle, so I have to purchase a hardback, it's going to take a while.
Yeah, we're self-publishing this. We had some help from some people. Ed Babinski read the first draft, and he gave us some pointers. When I first started this project, I had sent like a synopsis of it to John W. Loftus, and he gave me some good pointers on it. And as it progressed, we had some good input. Some of the people who have reviewed the book are PhDs and have really enjoyed it. And so just read the reviews that we have so far to see if it's something you might like, might be interested in. You can also try the free sample if you do have a Kindle or a Nook ebook reader, and I always recommend downloading the sample before you purchase. But yeah, if you could support us, that would be great. I think it's important to get this message out there. It's important to share the atheist voice of the regular people, not the celebrity atheists that you see on Fox News debating Bill O'Reilly, but there's the everyday folks.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I'm grateful that the book was written, because I think I was talking to Peter about how I think that we don't tout up the idea of the atheist heart enough, or our human side, that many of the people who are speaking for us are touting up, talking about evolution, different things, which is why I think atheism and evolution are being associated, even though they're two mutually exclusive ideas. And I think that we don't concentrate enough on, like, we hear a lot of people who say things like, atheists don't know about love, or if they demystify everything, they demystify love, blah, blah, blah. They make it very technical. And I look at it like, sure, there's some scientists who have mapped out where the love, places in the brain and can stimulate it and recreate feelings of love. But does that take away from the emotion itself? No more than knowing that when I eat, it's a chemical process, takes away from the enjoyment of eating food. Why? Just because you understand the process of something doesn't take away from the value of it. That's where I think people get confused. And so, yes, we have the capacity to love, even if we understand the chemical processes involved with that. What's that got to do with anything? And we have hearts. We are humanistic. We go out there and we give to charities. You know what I'm saying? We're just like anybody else. We bleed blood, people. We just happen to not believe in God. Come on. So the book does that, and it does it very well, in my opinion.
So yes, all 3 links will be there, so you can buy it, whether digital copy or hard copy. Be sure to give it a look. With that, I guess we should now take it off air. So are there any final words that you two would like to give on anything that's been discussed?
Let me say something first, and then I want him to end out his words to be the final words of the show. And I would just like to say thank you, Essence, for doing this, because I had an issue being able to do the Hangout.
Of course, the whole reason you couldn't do the Hangout was because you mirrored my video, which was flagged down, so I did kind of feel responsible for that.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to mention that because I definitely didn't want to make you feel bad, because I know that's not your fault. I chose to do it. I did it, and I would have done it even knowing they would have striked my account, because that was just BS.
It's a Christian studio. What do you expect? It's a matter of faith studio.
What happened was he did what was the name of it? The Reason of Faith, or A Matter of Faith?
A Matter of Faith, yes.
Of the movie. He did a review of it. The people who put the movie out.
It was just the trailer. I did a review of the trailer.
And so they got that change and twist. They went and DCMA'd him, and then I said, what? So I got a bunch of atheists together, and we all put his video up on our page and mirrored it, and then they struck us as much as they could, and then after a while, I guess they just got in trouble with YouTube because they stopped DCMAing people. But I got a strike on my account. But again, I didn't want to bring it up because it was a decision I would have made even if I knew it was going to make it impossible for me to do a live streaming thing, because I just thought that was BS, and I will not stand by and let people have their voices muted. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, and I also want to thank Tristan for his book, because I think it's gone a long way towards, helping people understand that we're human, that we came through this through a process. It was all individual. Each person was different. We are not hive-minded idiots. We have come to a decision for different reasons, but we all have come to a conclusion that there are no gods. For whatever reason. We can't prove it. It's unfalsifiable, dude. It's not a matter of proving it. It's just you say, I believe this. I say, I don't believe that. That's all that is. And there's nothing evil about it. So anyway, you close out your thing there, and tell us more about what you might be doing even in the future, as far as book.
Well, actually, I have a book that's completely written, and I'm looking for the right editor. But it's a rebuttal to the Christian theologian and apologist Randall Rouser, and he wrote a book called The Swedish Atheist, and I read it. And it was just condescending in the extreme towards atheists. And basically, it's a conversation. Randall Rouser's book is a conversation between a hypothetical atheist and himself in a coffee shop, and they go through over all these philosophical discussions. And he has some straw men. He has some real arguments that he addresses. But overall, it's just Randall Rouser's attitude towards the atheistic position is quite condescending, and he gets a lot of philosophical things wrong too. Which, as a layperson, I don't have a PhD in philosophy, but when I can find this PhD theologian's arguments so bad that I can pick them apart without that greater understanding, then there's something wrong. And I don't know if it's because he was intending to write it to a lay Christian audience, that he's making bad arguments, or what. But anyway, I decided to write my own version of the book. His book is called The Swedish Atheist, the Scuba Diver, and Other Apologetic Rabbit Trails. And my rebuttal to that book is called The Swedish Fish, Deflating the Scuba Diver, and Working the Rabbit's Foot. So it's just a pun on his title. It's completely written. I was maybe thinking of doing a crowd-source thing to get it, because I do need some serious editing by a serious editor who understands philosophy. Because I want it to be, I want a professional presentation on that. So that book is complete, and I'll get that out in the next 5 to 6 months, I promise. Then I have some other books. Actually, I'll grab a couple off the shelf to advertise them. I am gonna shameless plug myself.
Show and tell.
So these are my non-fiction compilations of a couple other anthologies I did. I write both fiction and non-fiction, but for non-fiction, I put together this book, which is called Reason Against Blasphemy. And it combines 2 blasphemy cases, one in England, one in the US, that really defined how our legal system looks at blasphemy in both England and the United States. The first one is the trial of G.W. Foote, George William Foote, who is he's the creator of the longest-running free thought magazine in the world, the very first secular free thought magazine that was published in England, and it's called The Free Thinker. So George William Foote founded that magazine, and he wrote many articles, lampooning religion, criticizing Christianity, and there was a period where he was challenged in the courts as a blasphemer, and he got sentenced to 1 year in prison. And so basically this is his court case and his prison memoir. And then that's book 1. Book 2 is the second court case, which was done in America, and it was the case of C.B. Reynolds and the defense done by none other than Robert G. Ingersoll, the great agnostic, one of the most famous orators of free thought, of atheism, and the secular values. And so that court case actually goes through, and they win it. But actually, the George William Foote's case against blasphemy was presented, and they actually, even though he gets sentenced to 1 year in prison, it was actually a victory in the British legal system as well, because nobody was ever incarcerated for blasphemy again after that. There were other people who went to court over blasphemy cases, but they never were sentenced. And George William Foote's case actually made that possible so that people wouldn't take it seriously. And then under Gordon Brown, was that your prime minister a few years back? He did away with the blasphemy laws. Anyway.
I wasn't so sure of that, because I know there's still been discussion about blasphemy. I don't know if they were trying to bring it back, etc. But I know there's still been discussion about it.
It was completely abolished, as far as I understand. Nobody can be persecuted for blasphemy anymore, as far as I understand. I could be wrong on that. But the other book.
Trying to bring that over here, Tristan. You do realize that some people are pushing for that over here, blasphemy laws.
Yeah, I suggest they read the introduction to my book. Or to the anthology. I did write an introduction to it, and I explain a little bit of the modern atmosphere and contemporary reason for why blasphemy, anti-blasphemy laws are being so readily used. It has less to do with actual offenses against religion than it does with actual territorial disputes among borders. But that's a weird thing. You have to read my introduction to kind of learn what that's about. The other book is called Seasons of Free Thought, and this is where I took G.W. Foote's collected works. It's all fallen into free domain. You can find it all on the Gutenberg website because it's over 70 odd years old. It's actually over 100 years old. So it was all free domain. And what I was doing was I love his writing, and I was searching for a collected work of G.W. Foote, an anthology of all of his free thought writing, which I absolutely love. The Arrows of Free Thought, Flowers of Free Thought, volumes 1 and 2. And there were no books. Nobody has published any books since his death. He was the only one who ever published any of his material. And I can't purchase the first edition copies because they're all collector's items. They're all collectors already have them all. So since it was all free domain, I did a little bit of research and found out that as an American, I can publish I can republish his free thought works, and that's what this massive tome is. It's all of his free thought writing it's all 3 books that he did on that he self-published himself. And I can't publish any of the free thinker stuff because that's already copyrighted and maintaining copyright by the Free Thinker magazine. But all of his self-published free thought works were in public domain. So I highly recommend checking him out. He's very witty, almost like a Mark Twain, a British version of Mark Twain. He's cheeky, as you would say. So I highly recommend it. And then my other books, I wrote a zombie book, if you like fiction stuff. And so I'm working on, I wrote a sequel to that, and I'm working on the 3rd edition to that, and I'm working on a science fiction novel called The Daughter of Saul. And so these will be out in the next couple of years. So yeah. You can check my author website, tristanvick.com, for my...
I believe we have that one linked as well. So yes.
Thank you.
We have to bring it to a close with that. So thank both of you for being here. It's been an awesome experience. It's been a pleasure co-hosting with sepiasiren. It's been brilliant talking to you, Tristan.
Everyone in the chat room was wonderful. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Thank you for coming and chatting.
Okay, so with that, I think we should say our final goodbye. So take care, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, take care. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem.